Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it is. Yeah, but I will find that for you. You can also actually, if you go up the stairs and talk to Rachel too, that's right there. Oh, is it? You can go too. Yeah, just talk to Rachel. Okay. Yeah, just go up the stairs and upstairs. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. Yeah, we're here today for a great event to learn all about zero-emission vehicles. Thanks to all of our presenters that have joined us today. Thank you as well to those who are joining us online through Zoom. I know there was some dicey weather out there, so again, thank you as well to those who came to join us here in person. Before I turn things over to Becky to give us our welcome note, want to thank a number of individuals and organizations who've made this event possible today. Mike Brigham Foundation, Lakeland Solutions, the North Bay Parry Sound District Health Unit, and some other partners as well have been really key at helping us create this project that's been ongoing over the last year, centered around zero-emission vehicle education. So we're very excited as well to have a lot of our IceCap partners here today to learn more about these as well too. And hope you have just a great day. There's coffee, tea outside, some snacks as well. And as you may have heard from our invitations, that lunch will be provided as well too. So I'll turn things over to Becky to start our day.
Thanks, Ben. So welcome. Good morning, everyone. Bindigan. My name is Becky Pollock. I'm the Executive Director with the Georgian Bay Minnedoh-Gami Biosphere. I work to support, among other things, I work to support the climate team here, the IceCap members in our community, and the community climate initiatives. I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself in Anishinaabe-Moin in honor of the territory on which we're gathered today. Ani Bojo, Becky Indigenous, Katakenzi and Odem, Nobel and Donjaba, Canadian, Scottish and Dao, Georgian Bay Minnedoh-Gami and Donji Anaki. Miigwech and welcome, Bindigan, thank you and welcome. Thanks, Ben, for holding this event today. When we think about the territory and our response, this is one really, really important one. And so I want to acknowledge the area First Nations, including Wasauksing First Nation and to the North Shawanaga First Nation, and all Indigenous community members who have shared their knowledge with us and taught us the Anishinaabeg values of respect, responsibility, and reciprocity. We're very grateful for those teachings and for the generations of caretaking for Georgian Bay, Minnedoh-Gami, or Spirit of the Great Lake, which we now have the privilege to enjoy and the responsibility to protect. Together, we want to acknowledge the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850, the Williams Treaties of 1923, and honor the international rights of Indigenous peoples adopted by the United Nations as a framework that we should all be striving to uphold. Today is an exciting day. Today, we're connecting the global urgency of climate change to the local solutions that are available right now, the technologies, the infrastructure, and the market trends. We already know how urgently solutions are needed, and the good news is we have them. This is great. The bad news is that they're no longer optional, and they're certainly not always going to be easy. But in the long term, sustainable transportation in our community, in our province, in our country is absolutely essential for our well-being and our resilience for future change. I see all of us in this room, not just as some small part of these solutions, but really the leaders, the designers, and the architects of new ways of thinking and making everyday decisions. Every policy, every budget, every procurement. When you leave today, please commit to telling one person about something you learned. And if you're in a position to follow up with action, we're here to support you. We have networks of people and we have funding opportunities, and these are the kinds of initiatives that can snowball through collaboration. Before I forget, this year marks the 20th anniversary of our UNESCO Georgian Bay designation. It belongs to all of us. I'm excited about how much we've achieved over 20 years, how much we've learned, and how much better we are at working together. So a very sincere thanks to all of you for your support over the years. Also, a big thanks to our workshop presenters today, everyone who is going to share their knowledge and expertise with us, and our climate team organizers, Ben John, Emma Burton, and Ethan Schneier. They're working in service to IceCap members, but also to the region as a whole. And so let's give them a round of applause, please. I'll turn it back to Ben John, one of the founders of the IceCap model for our region, and he brings degrees in business administration, sustainable resource management, and most of all, a true passion for this work. Thank you, Ben, and miigwech to everyone for coming.
Thank you for the introduction, Becky. And yeah, I guess I forgot to also introduce myself when I was giving everyone some of the house rules. So my name is Benjamin John. I'm the Climate and Energy Programs Manager at the Georgian Bay Biosphere. As Becky mentioned, zero-emission vehicles for myself is sort of one of the passion areas that I have within all of the work that I get to do in energy management and supporting IceCap. I've had, experience so far through my career in helping develop and expand EV charging infrastructure networks, helping municipalities convert fleet vehicles to, electric models, including some of their police fleets, as well as a number of different other, topics related to zero-emission vehicles. So I'm really excited to be here today, and also to have, again, as I mentioned, all of our presenters join us. And we do have a very jam-packed agenda today, so I'll stop talking and pass it over to our first presenter, Kara Clareman. So Kara, if you'd like to join us, thank you.
Good morning. Well, I'm glad some of you made it with that weather yesterday. It's a bit of a surprise, but hey, climate change, right? That's what we're talking about, and you can't help but notice it this winter. So as Ben said, I'm Kara Clareman. I'm the president and CEO of Plug and Drive, and I'm going to tell you just very briefly what Plug and Drive is all about, and then do a bit of an overview of EVs, their benefits, anything you wanted to know about EVs, and I'm going to stick around for a bit after. So if you have questions at the break or whatever, please feel free to approach me. So Plug and Drive. Plug and Drive's a nonprofit, not dissimilar to Georgian Bay Biosphere. We're all about climate change, but our goal is to accelerate EV adoption. And we do that mostly through education. So through things like this, but also primarily with test drives involved. So some of you might have participated last summer in a test drive that was held right in front of this building. We travel all around the country offering test drives like that. We do find getting the butts in the seats is the key to getting people to make the switch, because people do have a lot of preconceived ideas about an EV, and the reaction we always get is like, oh wow, it's like a really good car. I could drive this car. So sometimes people just need to see that it's not something really different, really difficult. And so we do that. We do a bunch of research and other sort of virtual work, but the bulk is education. If you happen to be in downtown Toronto anytime soon, we've actually just opened a new test drive center right at Yonge and Bloor. You can get there, you don't even have to go outside. It's right attached to the subway. And we have our cars parked underneath. And so if you have the opportunity, please stop by. But mostly what we do is we travel, because we know not everyone can get to the GTA, and we hit as many towns as we can, usually from April to November, and then not in the wintertime. You can imagine today is not the day that people want to go out and test drive cars, but we do them in the winter occasionally, but we try to avoid it. We've been doing this for over 12 years now, and so you can imagine people say to me like, wow, like what was it like back then? Hard. It was hard. People didn't even know there was such a thing as electric vehicles. So knowledge has really improved, although I would say, get a lot of the same questions I got 12 years ago, unfortunately. We're still kind of like, instead of EV 101, maybe we're like EV 102. Like we haven't sort of really graduated though. People still have a lot of misunderstandings. Another cool thing we're doing is we have what we call our MEET, our mobile EV education trailer, which is sort of a little bit more than just a one-day road show where we come with tents and flags. It's a trailer, but trailer doesn't really do it justice. It pops open and has all the educational stuff inside, including chargers and information, and then we bring the cars. And what we like to do is plunk that down for a month. And so if a group, for example, of municipalities want to get together and do something, that would be a way of doing it. We have done that. We just came off at the end of the fall in Barrie, we did a month. We've done a lot of Southern Ontario, but we'd like to get further north because we know those are the folks who really don't have test drive opportunities. So keep that in mind. And of course, like any good not-for-profit, I would be remiss if I did not thank the sponsors who make it possible for us to do what we do, especially through COVID, because of course we couldn't have our facility open and we couldn't offer test drives. It was really hellish, and they stuck with us anyway. We're very pleased to have them and appreciate their support. And it was interesting, I heard you say the Mike Brigham Foundation, he's helped us too. He's fantastic. Okay, so let's get into the substance of it. Why EVs? And I'm going to do a little bit of the basics, and hopefully some of you might already know all this. But transportation is, if not the largest emitting sector, the second largest, pretty much everywhere. Here in Ontario, it's number 1. In Canada-wide, it's number 2. So it's huge. And if we don't tackle transportation, we cannot achieve our climate goals. That's just what it is. And the thing about transportation is actually easier to tackle than a lot of other areas. Like industry's tougher. A lot of industry processes harder to take the carbon out. Whereas transportation, we actually have some solutions like EVs and other solutions that actually drop emissions really significantly, and I'm gonna explain why. So just taking Ontario as an example, since we're here, this is our electricity grid, more or less. So about 90% GHG free. So, and free is like a word I don't really like to use because nothing is emission free, but very super low emissions. About 10% of our grid is still fossil fuel, but that tends to run, that's natural gas plants. I'm sure you've heard about that. Those tend to run at the peak time. So when I say peak time, you think about electricity use, that's in the middle of the day. Typically like from sort of 2 to 4 in the afternoon. When all the buildings are running, when all factories are running, everything like that. At nighttime, we typically don't even turn on natural gas. That's the great thing about a fossil fuel plant, actually, is that it's easy to shift on and off. Whereas nuclear and hydro, it's on. We're not turning them on and off. Most of the hydro in Ontario is what we call run of the river, which means we don't pond it up, it just goes. So just think Niagara Falls. I mean, it just runs and you can't really slow it down there very much. They do actually a little bit, but it's difficult to control it. And so if you think about that, you think, okay, so then 24/7, we have all this electricity, but at night when everyone turns everything off, we have what they call surplus baseload generation. We have a big surplus on the grid at night right now in Ontario. And it's actually a perfect match with EVs because mostly you're going to charge your car at night when you're not using it. Especially if you live in a single family home or townhouse, it's easy to charge at night. So you're going to come home, you're going to plug in overnight. That's when electricity is the lowest emitting, not 100%, but like 98% greenhouse gas free. It's also the cheapest time. That's when we have the time of use price is very low. And if you select that ultra low, I don't know if the Lakeland folks are here, but now there's an option to select an ultra low price at night. It means you take a higher peak price though, so you have to do the math on whether it makes sense for you. But the ultra low price is like 2 cents. So I'm doing that and it costs me like less than $1 to charge my car overnight. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's almost ridiculous. Like when you try to explain to people how much money they save, because they see that sticker price of the EV and they're like, oh, EVs are so expensive. And it's like, no, you can't look at an EV the way you look at a gas car. You have to do the total cost of ownership, which includes the fuel. And so an EV, even an expensive EV, like you compare a mid-range Tesla to a Honda Civic, over 5 years, the Tesla is cheaper. But people don't do that math. And this is a huge challenge. And if you look at the demographics of who's buying EVs, it's engineers, it's IT people, it's people who do math, people who've done the calculation. And when people go into a dealership, it's hard to get them. They're not thinking that way. So it's hard to get people to do this. And to be honest, like the dealerships aren't necessarily knowledgeable enough to help people with this. So I hope that gives you like the basics on sort of the why, the economic why and the environmental why. Like those are the two big reasons you choose an EV. So more than 90% emission reduction. But then the question I used to always get, well, yeah, that sounds great and everything, and to save money, going to reduce emissions. Okay, maybe I get it, but there isn't a model for me. I'm waiting for the SUV, the pickup truck, whatever. You name it, somebody, mostly it was SUVs that people were waiting for and trucks. Well, wait no longer because they're here. They are hard to get still, so I wouldn't say it's a breeze yet. And the trucks are still a little pricey, but there are a lot coming. So that whole issue of make and model is going away as an issue. Like maybe it's still here a little bit right now, but within a year or two, I mean, we're not going to be talking about that. Every brand has a model. Did anybody get to the auto show in Toronto this past, it was just like a week ago? If you can believe it, we gave over 7,000 drives in electric cars in 10 days. 7,000, like 900 a day. It was insane. But there were 15 models, including a Hummer, including the Lightning, including like everything you can think of that was there. And so this issue, I believe we won't talk about this issue another year or so from now. And then of course, range. Range remains a concern. And I would say for folks like you that live in a smaller community, it's a real thing. So I don't want to say like, oh, it's nothing. You gotta be honest with people. Range is still a challenge for some drivers. But the thing that you have to do, even if you live rural, is you gotta think about what do you actually do, not what you might do someday. So I get the question every day, it's like, well, what am I gonna do if I wanna drive across Canada? And I'm like, are you? You're gonna drive across Canada? Maybe once in your life? Like, why are you using that use case? That is not the use case, right? The use case is I drive to work every day, I drive to soccer, I drive to hockey, I drive to grandma's. That's most of us, right? Once or twice a year, you drive to wherever, okay? Do not choose your car based on 1 or 2 trips a year. Base it on the 98%, and then for those 2 trips a year, first of all, so many Canadian families have 2 cars, take the other car. If you're not in that situation, rent a car, borrow from a friend. Like everyone's got a brother or brother-in-law with a minivan. I mean, that's what I do. I had only electric cars for 12 years now. And once a year, I borrow my brother-in-law's minivan, I give him our electric car, and I take it on a longer trip because it's too much hassle for me for that one time. But I don't want to not do the EV 99% of the time. So you get it. Just there's a lot of hesitation because of a road trip. Or I pull a boat once a year. I move my kid to university once a year. Rent a truck. Like this should not be the thing. Okay. The savings. Okay, so I talked about the savings. The math depends on your individual use case. The average Canadian drives about 20,000 kilometers a year. Little less post-pandemic, actually. We all drive less now. So maybe more like 15. But most of us hit around there. And so if you do the math on that average driver, just on fuel alone, it's about $2,000 to $2,500 a year. So you factor that into the extra you paid for the car, maybe $5,000 extra, because you probably get $5,000 rebate. So they're about $10,000 more. So you take the 5 off, then you're 5. So that's 2 years payback. And then you're in the money after that. So you really, really have to do the calculation. And you don't have to take my word for it. We have a great calculator on our website. Go after this, go try it. Okay, enter in your current gas car. Every make and model of gas car existing on Earth is in there. Okay, so you can put in, okay, I drive a Honda Civic 2015, whatever it is. And then you can compare it to any EV on the market that you're interested in. And it will produce a graph for you of your monthly savings and when you hit the I made all my money back point. And you'll see a lot of people, it's 1 year, depending on how much they drive. It might be 3 years if you're like a low driver, a low kilometer driver. Okay. And I mean, I know some of you work in municipalities and other roles. You might need medium duty. It's here. There's quite a few options actually in medium duty. Heavy duty, we're still, you know, I would say a couple years away from it really hitting the mainstream. Although, I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. Coke has some trucks, and you know, you see them. There's a few. I mean, the issue with heavy duty is batteries are extremely heavy. You probably know that. And so you can imagine how many batteries you got to put in a huge truck like that. And so it's a trade-off, range and weight. So there's still some work to be done there. But in terms of medium duty, there's quite a bit, including the Bright Drop, which is made in Ingersoll here, you know, not too far from here, just near Barrie. And a whole bunch of other Ford Transit Connects are available. Lion is making electric trucks right here in Quebec, right in Canada. And so there's quite a few choices. And I put a link there because Electric Autonomy has a good listing of trucks. We kind of focus on light duty, so we don't have a great selection on our website, but this one is good. And just wanted to spend 2 minutes that we're not only talking about road vehicles. I mean, there's electric boats, and actually that Mike Brigham is really into that. I don't know if you know, he'll probably come and show you his boat in the summer. Electric boats, electric trains, electric planes, it's all happening, right? It's quite amazing. And the one that I find the most amazing is school bus. School bus is such a huge opportunity. I feel like a broken record because I've been talking about school buses for like 10 years, but there are finally some on the roads, and there might even be some around here. And the reason they make so much sense is no school bus route is more than an hour. That's, I think, like required, right? Because they don't want the kid who lives the farthest to be on the bus any longer than an hour. So they design all the routes to be 1 hour long. And so the bus is only going to drive an hour, then it's going to sit for 6 hours, then it's going to drive an hour, then it's going to sit for 10 hours. And so it's really easy to electrify. It doesn't even need that huge of a range. And there's the opportunity to take power out of the batteries and all sorts of great opportunities with school bus. So watch for that, it's coming. Okay, let's just spend 2 minutes on the nuts and bolts. Are there any EV drivers in this crowd? A couple, 4 of us. So you know this already, but for the people who don't, this can be a little bit confusing. So basically there are 3 levels of charging. And when you think level 1, think 110 outlet, the same plug that you plug your phone or hairdryer or anything into, normal plug. And by the way, any EV on the market can charge on that plug. And you actually don't need to buy anything. You're ready. It comes with a cord set in the trunk that charges on 110. Now, the downside of that is it's slow. Now, if you choose a plug-in hybrid, for example, Mitsubishi Outlander, Ford C-Max, or any such plug-in hybrid, an old Chevy Volt, it has a battery pack and it has gas. And typically the battery pack, it might be 40 kilometers range, might be 80. It's like in that ballpark. And so you can plug that thing in on 110 and it's not a big battery. So you can easily charge it overnight on 110. And so you really don't need anything. You don't need a charger, nothing. Level 2, think dryer plug. It's basically the equivalent of a dryer or stove plug, but it really speeds things up. And basically any car on the market today, even the 600-700 kilometer range, you know, Rivian or Lucid, I don't know if you've seen those. Whew. They get like 700 kilometers range. You can still charge that overnight on a level 2. So most EV drivers that have sort of a 400, 500, 600 kilometer battery will put in a level 2 charger at home. It's pretty easy to put in because any electrician can do it. It's just like putting in a dryer plug. And the cost really depends on how far it is from the service. So if your panel is near the spot you want to put the charger, it'll be cheap. If it's far, it'll be more. But what I would say the average, like charger plus install, anywhere from like $1,200 to $2,000. That's the ballpark of installing level 2. It's not super expensive in the scheme of the car. So that's the kind of charger I have. By the way, I don't have a garage. So my car sits outside and I've never had a problem. 12 years going, it's a steel box. It's totally fine. These things are not fancy. They're like a glorified dryer plug. So they last. And then level 3. So level 3 is what you're going to see a highway rest stop, maybe at the mall. You see that Lakeland's putting some in around town. I've seen them around. There's one at that Trestle Brewery, and there's Ivy has some around here, and Flo has a couple near here. Basically, charge your car, pick up about 200 to 250 kilometers in a half an hour now. That's about the speed. So the great thing about that is if you do want to do a road trip, you stop for lunch, you plug in, you go to the bathroom, you get your lunch, you check your emails, half an hour goes by. So people who say, oh, I'm going to stop for half an hour. It's like, I don't know if you guys have kids, but you cannot stop at one of those rest stops for less than half an hour. It's almost impossible by the time you get the food and do all the things. But so I don't find this a hassle, you know, so people imagine it will be a hassle. You make that stop anyway. I mean, nobody continues to drive without ever stopping. And these, by the way, are getting faster and faster, like the Tesla chargers. If you're going the Tesla route, they're super fast. You go to get your lunch and come back, you've already gone too long. It's like 15 minutes. So it depends on the car, but it depends on the connection and the power of the charger. But more or less, you're going to be able to do a road trip. I've done many in my EV, and it's totally fine. Even on a day like today, when you lose range because it's freezing out. If you're thinking about a home charger, this is just, we have a website where you can compare the features of all the different ones. They're all pretty similar. The main difference is some of them are like what I would call dumb. It's just a plug. That's all it is. It doesn't give you any information. It doesn't have an app. It doesn't have a tap. It doesn't do it. That's it. It's just a plug. For most of us at home, that's all we need. Your car is so smart, and the app to the car can tell you to turn on and off the car, for example, at the time of use or whatever. So I don't have a smart one. But if you're somebody who wants like to know all the kilowatt hours and all that and wants to like look at a spreadsheet, like go ahead. You can get a charger that has all those bells and whistles. It costs more. It costs more. I opted not to get all that. And then people say to me, well, okay, let's say I'm convinced for the home use, but what if I don't have a home charger? I live in an apartment. It's too hard, and I'm going to have to rely on public charging. How am I going to do that? Well, if you live in urban, suburban Canada, it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy. There's lots of charging options. As you get further away from the center of, big city, it gets harder. It does get harder. So, it's getting better. You'll see like what Lakeland's doing is amazing around here, and it's going to make it a lot easier. But if you're somebody who regularly drives, for example, to Thunder Bay, it's going to be a challenge. That's a challenging drive right now. It's doable, but not great. So, there's still work to do, is what I would say. But if you're not somebody who does that kind of thing regularly, you shouldn't hesitate. All other kind of more local driving, totally fine. There are a lot of different public networks being built right now. Amazing amount of networks, which is great. There's a good side to that, which is like lots of options, more expansion, like Petrocan's doing it and Shell's doing it. And, you know, so they'll be at the gas stations and it's getting easier. The downside of this, I would say right now, is there's a lot of different machines and they're all just a little bit different. And so the first time you go, it's like, do I tap first and then unplug, or do I unplug and then tap? Some of them take a credit card, some of them don't. Some of them you have to have an app on your phone. Some of them you have to have a card. And people say, oh, what the F, that's such a hassle. Well, what I do is, I think most of us do, is creature of habit thing. I know there's certain brands and I know where they are and I just stick with those. And I have a couple of cards and I leave them in my glove box and I have them. So that's how I manage it. These will consolidate over time and some of it's already happening. Charge Hub is like the mapping group that they put out, like PlugShare, they put out the map with all the charging stations. They've got a thing where they're getting all the different chargers to join it. And then you can just pay through Charge Hub and you can use like 5 or 6 different networks through that. So that kind of thing is happening. I kind of liken it to like, you guys look young, but remember when the bank machines didn't have Interact and you had to go to your bank machine to get money? that was a thing. Anyway, we're kind of in that phase right now with EV charging. Like you still have a little bit of a challenge there, but it is getting easier. Okay. 10 more minutes, okay? I just wanted to mention a couple of studies that we're working on. Just thought you might be interested. You might also be surprised that women are not buying EVs. And we don't know why. There's like, the stats are like 75-25. And it's true like almost everywhere in the world. And the unfortunate thing about this is that women, if you look at other studies, are the ones who make the car buying decision for the family. And so that means they're not choosing an EV for their family. And so we thought, well, we got to get to the bottom of it. Why is this happening? Because I wasn't sure why. And you can think of a couple of reasons that seem plausible. Are they like techie? Maybe women think they're too techie. Maybe there's like a safety concern. So these are some of the reasons that we were thinking might be it. I'm going to have I'm doing a webinar next week with Canada Talks Electric Cars, which is like a national group, and we're going to present the results, but I'll just give you like the Coles notes of the results, which is that it looks like it is primarily a safety concern, but not what you might have thought. Not safety of the car, but safety of going to some remote location with a charger and there's nobody around. Now I have to tell you that that's happened to me and I have been kind of scared, you know, so, and in fact, it's around here, one of the ones that I had to use that will not be named, but that it's behind a building and it's dark and there's no lights and there's nobody there. And so I think a lot of women don't want to have to do that and they don't want to have to search when they're alone. And so, so this seems to be the concern. So we got to do a better job with having these things in public places with lighting and to make everyone feel safe. So anyway, stay tuned for more on that. Okay, now just a little bit on the trends and what's happening. So of course, EV adoption going up and up and up. We're up to like actually nationally about 12% new car sales. That's a national average. Some provinces much better than others. So for example, BC and Quebec are both over 20% new car sales. So they've basically crossed the tipping point. The rest of the country, not so good, including Ontario. Ontario kind of average. Ontario more like 8% or 9%. And you can just, you don't have to be a genius to figure out why this is. So rebates in the provinces added to the federal rebate, huge difference. And the other thing is ZEV mandate, which you may have heard of the ZEV mandate. Do people know what that is? I'll explain it just in. Oh, great. Well, I don't want to steal your thunder, But basically, you automakers provide more cars on lots. We're going to have that. It's passed into law now. We just the implementation is just kind of going on now. So that'll be national, but Quebec and BC both already have that. And so you can see, and you'll see on certain automaker pages, they'll say, oh, we don't need the ZEV mandate. But then if you go to their websites, you'll see this new vehicle only available in Quebec and BC. Why? You know, so we know it works. It works. So that's good. So we're going to have more of that. And, you know, and the feds actually have done a lot. They've really done a lot to fund EV adoption. So they have the $5,000 rebates. And by the way, if you have your own small business, you get a tax credit, which is better than the $5,000. So don't take the $5,000 if you have your own business. And then they've put a ton of money into infrastructure, some of which has benefited this community, I know for sure. It's called ZVIP, and they've been really, it's a 50-50 cost sharing thing, but it's done a lot for EV infrastructure. They've got funding for medium and heavy duty, and buses and a whole bunch of other things. But really, I think, you know, we all have to vote if this is an important issue for you, because it's not clear that this will stay if the government changes. So you should be thinking about that when you decide who you're going to vote for. And the thing this provincial government has done the most is they've put a huge investment into manufacturing. So this is just to give you an idea that there's so many EV plants that have been invested in the last 2 years, mostly in southwestern Ontario, but some elsewhere, including battery plants, including EV manufacturing facilities, all kinds of stuff. So that's great. The thing that I would like to see is more done to help the consumer buy the car. Right now, if we don't do something here in Ontario, those cars are all going to the US. Canadians won't be buying those. And, you know, we all help pay for those plants. You know, huge government money went to those plants. So I think we should want some of those vehicles to end up being driven by Canadians. And so, you know, incentives would really help. We're below the national average right now in Canada, because people say, how's Canada doing? I'm like, well, meh, average. We're not doing bad, but we're not doing really good. You know, around the world now we're at 1 in 7 vehicles are electric, and in some countries much more. So we're falling behind. We're about 10th in the world right now, and we could do a lot better. And we know what to do. I mean, the thing is, it's not a mystery what to do. There are countries doing it. You've probably heard that Norway is the leader on this, and instead of incentivizing EVs, they disincented gas cars. And that made a big difference. So they put a massive tax on gas cars and made it so that EVs were cheaper. And then they did a bunch of incentives for parking in HOV lanes in Oslo and other big cities, and they've made it easier for people and cheaper. And it's interesting because, you know, Norway's a huge oil and gas producer. So it's kind of an interesting move that they made. Anyway, a lot of countries are doing better than us, and we can look at their policies and learn. I mean, it's not that hard for us to figure this out. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up. So what are we doing well? Like manufacturing, we're doing really well, which is great. Infrastructure, pretty good. I know you hear in the news like, oh, infrastructure stinks. That's the auto manufacturers saying that to sort of rag the puck. Honestly, that's the truth. They want to slow it down because they're not quite ready, which I get. They have to ramp up their production, and so they're saying, oh, the infrastructure is not ready, but the infrastructure is totally good. I mean, I got to tell you, I've been driving an EV for 12 years. 12 years ago, the infrastructure really wasn't good. Okay, it was terrible. You couldn't go anywhere. But now it's totally different. It's really doable. And just look on PlugShare or ChargeHub map, and you'll see it's much better than you might think. Education, of course, we can do better. I mean, there's groups like Plug and Drive. There's other groups doing test drives, local environmental groups that are doing things. But we've got to do more. I mean, there's only so much that some of these small charities and nonprofits can do. So, I mean, the dealers are starting to get with the program and do more, and we need them. We need them to do more. And companies can step up, by the way. Like, there's no reason we should be looking to the government to do everything. Companies can put in workplace chargers. That really encourages employees, really helps. They can give, lots of companies give wellness benefits to their employees. They give them money to buy a car. A lot of, depending on your job, like if you're in sales, you get a car, or you get a car allowance. You could give a better allowance if people choose an EV. There's lots of things corporate Canada can do, and right now they're not doing much. So this is an area where I think, we could do something, especially those companies that have made a proclamation on net zero by 2050. Like, okay, so do something to make that happen. And then there's some, of course, really cheap things we can do, like change the building code. If you can believe it, you can still build a condo with no consideration for EV charging. That's allowed. But I mean, what person should invest in a building that you hope will be around for 50 years and not consider this now? We all know where the puck is going, as they say. So why wouldn't you? It's a waste of money because the retrofit costs 10 times more than doing it when you build the building. So we need to change the building code and the electrical code. Those are easy to do. So a bunch of groups like mine and others, EMC, Electric Mobility Canada, are working on that. And finally, if you've been at all thinking, oh yeah, I want to try it, then try it. Book a test drive. There's lots of opportunities, especially in the better weather. If you're in Toronto, come see us. If you're just want to do it here, I'm sure we'll be here again, and there'll be more opportunities. But look on our events page. We post where we're going to be at any given time. And we always get up to the Bruce at least once or twice a year, which I know is still part of the Georgian Bay Biosphere. And we come up here, at least to the Muskoka region, at least once every summer. So watch for that. And that's it. I'm happy to take questions now or at the break or whatever, Ben, you tell me.
There we go.
Shy.
We have a few moments for questions, so if there's any questions in the audience, I can bring a microphone over to you as well. If there's any questions online, please put those in the chats as well. So I'll open it up to the audience, if there's any out there. Any questions online?
No?
Josh has one. Can you, if you do have a question, can you speak into the microphone so the people on Zoom can also hear your question?
Yes, thanks, Ben. Question for you. When you were talking about the infrastructure, if there was a mass adoption of EVs because of a government incentive that they just put in place tomorrow, would the infrastructure be able to accommodate a mass EV adoption?
Well, I mean, luckily or unluckily, that probably won't happen. I mean, at the pace that it's going in terms of adoption, there's no problem. You mean electricity infrastructure when you say infrastructure, right? Or do you mean the chargers themselves? Or both?
Both actually, yeah.
Okay, so, if like millions of people tomorrow, all of a sudden, no, probably not. We probably don't have enough. But, it does tend to go to be following the curve, the normal curve. And in that scenario, totally fine. I did mention earlier that in terms of electricity infrastructure, we actually have a big surplus of electricity at night. And so we're actually good for quite a lot more EVs, like if they came on. The challenge isn't so much if they all come on at once, but it's more locational. So if they all came on in a certain neighborhood or in a certain part of town, that's a challenge for the utility. But typically, it's kind of all over the place, and then most systems can handle it.
Question over here. Okay, question from the Zoom.
Two questions
Okay.
from the Zoom here.
Sure.
So the first question is a battery technology question. Lithium ion has been the big one. Lithium ion phosphate seems to be the next one. Will we see a switch just to lithium ferrous/iron phosphate? Or will we see a mix of battery chemistry for battery storage?
I think we're going to see a mix. Everyone could hear that, right? mix of battery chemistries. I think we'll see a mix for a while. Each automaker very much cares about that proprietary nature, and if they think they'll get an advantage by doing something that the others aren't doing, I think they will do that. But for example, there's some really cool stuff coming after that, like solid state batteries and even salt batteries. There's so much research going on in this area, so batteries are going to get lighter, cheaper, more reusable, all these things. And just another question that usually follows from that is like, what are we going to do with all these used batteries? They are so valuable, you don't have to worry that we're going to end up with all these batteries in landfill sites. That is not going to happen. The automakers want to take them back and refurbish them and then recycle them because they're just so valuable. And in places where the automakers don't have the ability to take back, because automakers are global, there are recyclers who will do it. So that's not a concern at all. About 80 to 90% of the battery is reusable, recyclable.
Great, thank you for your answer. I have a second question here from the Zoom. Will you be attending the Battery Electric Vehicle Conference in Sudbury in late May?
I will try to come to that. I couldn't make it last year to that, but Plug and Drive was there. I just wasn't personally there. And usually we offer a test drive at that event. So if you plan to be there, you'll get a chance to do some drives.
And then just a second part, this one's from Rethink Green. I'm not sure if
Sure,
you're
yeah, I
familiar
know
with
them.
They would love to discuss opportunities to collaborate on the sidelines for that event.
Email. I hear my emails. Well, this is our generic email, but if they send an email to this email address, I'll get it.
Great, thank you.
And just maybe on the battery, the one other question I often get is, what happens if the battery craps out? And then I'm going to have to replace the battery in the car, and people have that fear of like, it's going to be a huge cost. So the battery is the most expensive part of the car, and that's true. And a new battery might cost a lot, that depending, again, brand to brand, they're all a bit different. So there's people studying how are these batteries lasting, and we have data now from about 2011, because of course those were like the early EVs. The 2011 was really the first model year. And so we have about 12 years of data that shows actually these batteries are lasting incredibly well, and it looks like they will outlast the body of the car. The 2011s are more or less still on the road. So this is not probably a real concern. Is it possible to get a lemon? Sure. But this idea that there's going to be like, you're going to have to replace the battery is probably not ever going to happen.
We have time for one more question.
Where are things at with standardization of the actual plugs that go into the car? So like Tesla has its format, there's J1772, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay, so she's asking about the actual socket or, in the car. And you've probably heard a bunch of automakers announce they're going to this NACS Tesla plug because it is more efficient and it's better, honestly. So eventually that's happening. It hasn't happened yet. So right now for level 2, pretty much all the brands are on the J1772. So that's what you'll see out and about in terms of chargers. But you can be sure all those chargers will get upgraded with the right wand when the new model of car comes out with the Tesla plug. And on the level 3s, there's actually still 2 standards, but you'll see most of the chargers have both, so it doesn't really affect the driver that much. So we are, again, like beta VHS, we're kind of in that time, and it's going to go to Tesla. But I would say you won't see it in a car that's not a Tesla until 2025 model year.
Great. Well, thank you again, Kara,
My
for your time
pleasure,
today.
and I'll
It's
stick
been
around.
wonderful, and just wanted to give you a small little gift as well.
Ooh, love it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, everyone, thank you again. We'll just get the next presentation set up here for a second, and we'll roll right into things.
I want to reuse my cover.
Great. While we're setting up, I wanted to draw your attention to this amazing workbook on your tables, and some of you were sent it on Zoom. Not only are there links for every presenter, but on the back page, I want to draw your attention to upcoming events. One of them is one where we will have the Plug and Drive test drive set up. That's August 17th here at the Stocky Center Sustainable Transportation event. So mark your calendars for August 17th. That's going to be a really great day where we have at least 5 models of EVs to test drive. And last summer, the same event, we had 300 people through the day. It was really wonderful. It'll be bigger than ever. So please plan to attend. And there's a couple of other events coming up March, April, and June for your calendars. And just also to draw your attention to these little informational cards, working with some of the sources like Lakeland and, Plug and Drive, we've been able to summarize key information for you on these little cards. You can take them home. You can stock your township or your building. We have thousands. So it would be great to get those out in circulation. But that last question about the plugs, Katrina, is summarized here. There's that NACS universal plug here in the chart. So thanks very much. Thanks, Ben. Great materials.
Wonderful. Thank you, Becky. So I'll be the next presenter for our next session today. And as you may remember, my name's Ben John, and I'm the Climate and Energy Programs Manager at the Georgian Bay Biosphere. As Kara went over in her presentation, there are many benefits to zero-emission vehicles, which I'll just refer to as EVs for simplicity for this. And I also wanted you to think about the different vehicles in each of your respective communities over the years, because I'm sure that you've slowly started to witness, the number of these vehicles increase on your roads. So understanding the adoption and growth trends of these vehicles is really important because it helps in understanding and helping to make decisions around the need for things such as charging infrastructure, those supporting services, but also just general trends which are impacting how people and goods are moving within your communities. Which is why for this session here, I really just want to focus on 2 questions. Where are we in terms of EV adoption, and where are we going? So with this, we're looking at things such as, what does that current rate of EV adoption look like? How many of these vehicles are actually on our roads? Are more and more being purchased every year? Or is this sort of just a fad that's being seen? We're also going to look to the future to understand where these trends might be headed, as Kara sort of alluded to with that zero-emission vehicle mandate, to help us prepare ourselves appropriately. And to do this, I am going to tell everyone ahead of time that you're going to see a lot of graphs, because I want to really ground these answers in solid data that's out there and localize it as much as possible. There are a few different types of EVs that are out there. These are all classed as zero-emission vehicles, but really for the data that I'm going to show, we're going to focus on plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and battery electric vehicles. Again, as much of the data as we're going to see is focused on of these, but both of these types of EVs are considered zero-emission vehicles. So to start things off, where are we? I'll jump straight into that question by showing you the actual new BEV and FEV registration numbers up until the most recent data, which is Q3 of 2023. Statistics Canada gathers new vehicle registration data from each provincial authority and then brings it all into sort of one central location for everyone to see and access. So anytime someone's purchased an EV in Ontario and registers it through Service Ontario, all of that information is captured up on this screen here. And really the key takeaway from this data and this visual is that, you can see that there's very strong growth in the number of new EVs that are being purchased in Ontario. Since 2020, there's been sort of year-over-year growth, which if on average is almost doubling basically on an annual basis. We can also pick out some other growth trends when we start to compare quarters across years. But what I find really incredible about some of this growth is that if we start to add some external market factors into this timeline, this growth is really occurring despite a lot of forces pushing against it. So as Kara mentioned, actually, as you may recall too, Ontario used to actually have a provincial rebate that was given to consumers for the purchase of an EV. And back in 2018, that was scrapped. And while we can see that, scrapping that rebate contributed to some stunted growth in the following year, this really rebounded very, very quickly in 2020, which also is the start of COVID, as you may recall. On top of this, the Bank of Canada's interest rate has rapidly increased since the beginning of 2022. And as you'll know, what this does is increase the cost of borrowing over time. I find this very interesting because, this tells us that as the cost of borrowing increases, people tend to spend less money, especially on bigger ticket items like a vehicle. But we can see that, actually the opposite is holding true in the case of EVs. As that interest rate really starts to rise in 2022, this is when we're starting to see a huge leaps in EV adoption in Ontario. Part of this, I think, largely also has to do with those cost-saving benefits that were mentioned. If you look at the total cost of ownership of an EV compared to a gas vehicle, that total cost of ownership is going to be less because it has those reduced maintenance and fuel costs. And so as that interest rate rises, we can suspect that many people are really just trying to access those longer-term benefits of the reduced overall costs. The registration data also allows us to understand what types of EVs are being purchased in Ontario. And perhaps contrary to popular belief, most of the EVs that are being purchased are not actually those small compact cars. In fact, as you can see by that blue line, multi-purpose vehicles like SUVs and crossovers are really dominating the market. And that gap between these types of vehicles and cars is growing in size too. As we saw in that last presentation, there's over 50 different models of EVs available on the Canadian market right now. And there's actually an additional 41 new models coming to the Canadian market in 2024 this year. So to date, the Ford F-150 Lightning's really been it has actually been the only electric pickup truck out there. But many of the other major North American auto manufacturers, they've also announced electric pickups in their lineups, many of them becoming available in this year as well as in 2025. So that pink line that represents pickup trucks, we can expect to likely increase in the coming years as well. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but if we think back to that growth curve, it very much correlates well with the growth in EV charging stations that we've seen here in Ontario as well as other parts. We do have a lot. We're one of the leading provinces in terms of total number of charging stations, but as Kara mentioned, there's still room to grow that, especially in some of those rural communities and northwards as well too. And we're also seeing programs to help shrink those gaps too. So for example, in 2023 and earlier this year as well, the Ontario government, for example, had an open call for applications for their Charge On program, which was dedicated to providing funding to rural communities in Ontario to install EV charging stations. So this is in addition to the annual federal program that exists. So really the number of charging stations in the province is growing each year, and there's actually new ones coming online each and every week. This graph up here is actually just the original one that I showed you depicting that growth in EV adoption. And I brought it up here again because I just want to play a little bit of devil's advocate as to why this trend might occur. So yes, there's obviously a clear growth trend here, but a very real argument could be that, well, if the overall number of new vehicles in general being purchased are increasing, then that could explain why we're seeing growth in the EV sector as well too. But that's actually not the case of what's happening. So this graph up here shows the number of new gas vehicle registrations in Ontario each quarter. And what we can see is that there's an overall decreasing trend in the number of new gas vehicles that are being purchased each and every year. And so when we compare these two, we can actually see that there's an inverse relationship happening. More people are beginning to purchase EVs and less people are purchasing gas vehicles. And so in other words, when it comes to new vehicle purchases, people are transitioning towards electric vehicles. Every consumer has their own reason as to why they might be making this switch. But generally speaking, I think it just suggests that more and more people are seeing sort of the benefits that these vehicles can bring to their daily lives or businesses as well, and they're opting to choose them. And this assumption holds true when we're looking at the vehicle registrations for this all fuel types in Ontario. So this is all vehicles of all fuel types. In fact, there's actually been a gradual, just a slight gradual decline in the number of new vehicles being sold in Ontario. And again, as we saw in that last slide, of those new vehicles that are being sold, more of them are becoming EVs and less of them are becoming gas-powered. So when we look at EVs as a percentage of the new vehicles being sold across the country, we can really start to see a trend, an increasing trend in really every province. Ontario is this blue line that we have on the screen here with, around 8%, as we just heard, new vehicles being sold are in EV. In Canada, that number is 10 to 12%. And so that's, 1 in 10 new vehicles. There's also some other provinces as well, too, that are way ahead of Ontario, BC, and our neighbors in Quebec. These provinces are currently roughly at about a 20% adoption rate. So 1 in 5 new vehicles for them are being sold as an EV. And given this growth rate, part of showing this data is to highlight there's also a lot of misinformation out there in the media about these vehicles and how much they're growing. These are just a few quick examples that I pulled off of Google, and if you can see the dates, they're actually quite recent as well too. So they say things such as Canadians are less keen to purchase EVs. Fewer Canadians are now considering one. Canada is facing a declining EV interest. And being quite familiar with all this data that I've shared with you, I often look at these headlines and I think to myself, well, really? Because the actual vehicle registration data, which also wasn't referenced in any of those news stories, it's actually showing a very different reality and a very different narrative. And this is something again that I mentioned that's happening across the country. So when it comes to headlines like these, I just point this out because I encourage you to read the articles fully and think critically about the data sources in which these claims are making, in which they're being made. Ask questions if you're unsure as well. Because regardless of that source, I don't think there's anything that tells a better story on, say, consumer trends and adoption than the actual sales of something. And this trend in EV adoption is happening across the world too. This is not something that's localized to Canada or Ontario. China, as we saw too, is the global leader in EV sales. Europe is leagues ahead of North America as well too, and countries like Norway are over 80% in their adoption too, with very similar cold climates to Canada. So now that we have a good idea of where we're currently at, we can sort of look to the future and ask ourselves, how is this trend going to continue into the future? And the key to that answer is actually in the electric vehicle availability standard, which is that, in other words, the ZEV mandate, which you may have heard on the news. And this is just a regulation that was recently brought into effect back in December of 2023, just a few months ago. This regulation has been a very big discussion in the news recently, so you may have heard of it, but it essentially requires that 100% of new light-duty vehicles sold in Canada be a zero-emission vehicle by 2035. And leading up to 2035, there's going to be a series of escalating sales targets that must be met starting in 2026, which is actually less than 2 years away now, which is crazy to think. Now, this doesn't mean that every vehicle sold by 2035 needs to be zero-emission vehicles. There's really 2 key pieces of information that tells us what vehicles are going to be impacted and subject to this regulation. The first is that this regulation is targeting just new vehicles. The used vehicle market won't be touched by this. The second is that only those new vehicles that are classified as light duty, and this is going to be things such as passenger cars, your introductory levels of pickup trucks like Ford F-150s, Ram 1500s, and assortments of vans as well too. Again, this is targeting new, as I mentioned, so you'll still be able to purchase gas versions of these vehicles that are used after that time frame. But for municipalities and for ICECAP members out there too, this is something that is going to subject part of your municipal fleets as well too. in working with you and looking at some of your data too. I know all of you have some light-duty vehicles within your municipal fleets, and now that this regulation is in effect, this means that by 2035, only zero-emission options will be available to replace those light-duty vehicles when you go to replace them with a new vehicle. Looking at this regulation in full, I also mentioned it that there are escalating sales targets starting in 2026 already. So through this regulation, it's now required that 20% of all new light-duty vehicles sold in Canada be zero emission by 2026. So that's, again, in less than 2 years, this is saying that 1 in 5 new light-duty vehicles sold in Canada must be a zero emission vehicle. And this, as Kara pointed out, is why we're seeing that heavy investment into EV manufacturing, particularly in Southern Ontario. We're seeing heavy investment into domestic mining practices up in Northern Ontario and other parts of Canada, really to help build that made in Canada supply chain for these vehicles. On this slide here, I've included the previous actual sales numbers next to the regulated sales target in an extended timeline. What you see here is Canada's line is the gray one in that group. And if you sort of continue that growth pattern out, it almost just about lines up with that 2026 target. So in other words, the start of this sales target really isn't that far off the mark based on that growth rate for the actual vehicle sales data. Also keep in mind that the actual sales growth that we've witnessed is occurred in an unregulated environment, in the sense that this has happened with no regulations dictating in Ontario how many EVs need to be sold in a given year. So this growth and adoption has occurred for part and due to incentives and market competition and some other factors as well too. So really just to kind of almost conclude things, if we smash these two questions together, we can see on the left side, this is where we are, and through these regulations, that right side is sort of where we're going with this curve. And if you still aren't sold on that this is sort of the direction that this trend is heading, I want to show this graph up here. And what this is the adoption curve for more or less every single major piece of technology that we can sort of consider to be a daily tool that we use in our households. You'll see that there's a lot of different types of technologies up here, but really there's two kind of features that I want to point out. The first is that in the year about 1900, just after, we see the introduction of the automobile, and it too had relatively slow growth until it really explodes in adoption around 1950. History repeats itself, and there's a lot of parallels between EV adoption and just the standard automobile adoption that was happening at the time too. The other feature that I want to point out is that as we progress in time closer to where we are today, the rate at which technologies are adopted increase in speed. So the lines are getting steeper. There's many reasons for that, but a big one is because of how interconnected all of our technology is, right? Our phones are now connected to the internet, which can speak to our TVs, our heating and cooling systems, our washers and dryers, really more or less everything up here. So EVs are also becoming increasingly interconnected with other technologies as well. So an EV can serve as a battery backup for your home in the case of a power outage to keep your fridge and your lights running. You can use your phone to automatically initiate charging sessions so that you can charge your vehicle at the lowest cost possible, and many more as well. And so while that regulated sales target for these vehicles might seem a little bit steep, when we actually add the current projected adoption curve for EVs, we can see that it's actually pretty well on par with just about every other household technology that we've seen in the last 100 years or so. And so before I turn it over into questions, I just want to leave everyone with a few key takeaways that I personally see out of all of this data. The first being that despite what some media sources are saying, EV sales are actually increasing. The vehicle registration data confirms this, and demand for these vehicles is also increasing. The second is that the newly enforced regulations and that technology curve, they indicate that growth rate is going to continue rising. Over the years, we're going to continue to see more and more of these vehicles in our communities, especially too. The third is that these regulations do have impacts on your municipal fleets, right? You all have light duty vehicles in your fleets. And I know more or less you all typically purchase new vehicles when it's time for the scheduled replacement of them, right? So that means that you're maybe one, maybe two replacement cycles away from that 2035 timeframe, when the only light duty vehicle options available for replacement are going to be an EV or a zero emission vehicle option. The fourth is that, being ahead of this curve is actually going to save you a lot of time and money in the long run. If you take a reactionary approach to this, it's going to end up costing you more money. There's plenty of funding out there right now for public and fleet charging infrastructure, for studies that look at fleet assessments that tell you how and when to electrify vehicles in the most cost-effective way. There's federal incentives which provide funding for the upfront purchase and sticker price of these vehicles. And, I don't think all of this funding is going to be around forever. So, being ahead of that curve, as I mentioned, you can access this type of funding and save yourself some in the long run. The fifth is something that we didn't really talk about in full detail, but as more variety and availability of these vehicles come to the market, the capital costs of them are going to decrease. We're seeing improved battery technology, increased competition. These are all major driving forces that reduce those overall costs. And as I said, in this year specifically, we're seeing 41 new models of EVs coming to the market in addition to the over 50 that are currently available. And finally, this trend is going to open up the doors to local economic development opportunities as well too. As more of these vehicles hit our roads, there's going to be greater need for people to service them. We need more local mechanics to be able to service them, and other supporting services as well too, with respect to charging infrastructure. So a lot of, even just, as I said, local economic development opportunities that can be capitalized on a trend like this. So thank you, miigwech, everyone. And if there's questions, I'm happy to take those now.
Does anyone in the crowd have any questions?
So it's pretty clear that Quebec and BC are leaders in the country with EV adoption. And I'm aware that Quebec has some pretty awesome rebates that I think you can also bundle with the federal rebates. Is that the same for BC and/or across the country? Are they always rebates on vehicles alone, or are there like charger rebates, those types of things?
Great question. Yeah, BC and Quebec, they both have a provincial rebate that goes on top of what the federal government is offering. And that's, as Kara mentioned, that's a huge reason why they're at about 1 in 5 new vehicles are EV at the moment, right? In Ontario, as I mentioned, we're still seeing that growth, but it's an interesting thing to imagine what that growth might be if that provincial rebate were still there. Other jurisdictions like BC, they also have a provincial incentive for charging infrastructure. So you often have that federal program, but they've offered a provincial incentive too that can even pass down to the consumer level, where we just saw the Charge On program here in Ontario, but that was more focused on public infrastructure rather than the one that goes into your home. So those types of programs definitely help support that growth, and that's why some of those places have seen much larger growth than what we've seen here in Ontario so far.
There's a question online.
A question online? Okay.
So this question was actually from the previous presentation, but you may have the answer. Emergency services have told me that EVs are a problem if they fail or run out of batteries, as the wheels lock up and so therefore cannot be pushed. Is that true?
Emergency service vehicles there's also some exemptions within that new regulation that I mentioned, that emergency services vehicles can be exempt from that. it's interesting too because with those types of vehicles, you have all of these lighting, you have your computer equipment that's also running off of electricity. There's a few ways to navigate that if that's something that those services wish to do. In my experience, in terms of helping to electrify some police vehicles as well as some fire dispatch light duty vehicles as well too, one of the things that we personally were looking into is installing a secondary battery source that all of the auxiliary lighting could run off. That way it wasn't feeding off of that main battery source. So there's also some mobile charging units. I've seen some jurisdictions have purchased basically a trailer and it's got a huge battery in the back of it. Similar to bringing a jerry can to fill something up remotely, you bring this mobile charging station to charge an emergency service vehicle. We don't see really a lot of the heavy duty emergency service like big fire trucks in Canada yet. There's a first one in Ontario that's just recently come online, but I can't speak much to the wheels locking up. That one I don't know much about, but we do have someone that might be able to tell us a little bit more later about that in today's workshop. So
Great. Thank you for your answer, Ben. And I think that concludes it for the questions.
Yeah. So we're running a little bit behind time. I think we're at 10:15 right now. So our next session is scheduled to start at 10:30. Why don't we take 15 minutes for a coffee break, a tea break, washroom, whatever you might be, and we'll get back here for 10:30 to pick things back up. Just want to see if people are looking for that.
Yeah. I'm trying to be green. I'm having my notes on my.
We'll get started in 2-3 minutes, everybody. Right. Shall we get this thing started then? The what, sorry?
Sorry, I want it to not go to sleep.
Yeah, sorry. All right, hello everyone. Thanks again for joining us back. We're going to get started again with our next session. But before we do that, I do want to point out that during the break, for those of you are here attending with us in person today, you'll see that there's a survey out on the middle of your desk now. Don't fill out that survey yet. Please wait until just before lunch. But I will say that you all are required to do that. That will be your ticket for lunch. If I don't get your survey, you do not get lunch. So just make sure that you have that, and thanks for doing that. But without further ado, I'd like to next invite Marjorie McDonald up from Lakeland Solutions, who will be discussing a little bit on EV charging infrastructure and focusing a little bit too on local EV charging infrastructure with their local network. So Marjorie, thanks for joining us, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Ben.
Very happy to be here today. Very happy to see events like this happening across our region. Give you a little bit of who we are to start with. So Lakeland Holding is the parent company for Lakeland Power, Lakeland Generation, Lakeland Networks, and now Lakeland Solutions. We're a subset of Lakeland Generation, but we get our own name and our own logo. So we're your local utility, your internet service provider, your hydropower station operators, and Lakeland Solutions is the innovative arm of Lakeland Holding. Why are we here today? Because Lakeland Solutions is building a network of EV chargers. I was trying to be green today and I printed all of my notes and left them on my phone, so I didn't use paper, but it's a little different than what I'm used to. So our EV charger network is in its infancy, but it's only in its infancy as far as time. We've been running chargers for 7 or 8 years now. So we don't have necessarily the number of chargers, but that is changing. We are building out 40 chargers this year. So by November, we're going to have 40 chargers around our region, and I'll show you that map in a little bit. We did some work, some of the earlier chargers we did. We tested demand management, the ability of the chargers to support the grid as the shift to EV increases the demand at different times of day, like Kara was saying, you know, everybody's charging overnight. Well, that's going to make a big difference in the way that the grid needs to support them. So we wanted to develop our network of chargers, and we want to be your local solution. We want to be your reliable local solution that you can turn to. It's the Lakeland way. Lakeland Networks is your local reliable internet service provider. Lakeland Power is your local reliable utility provider. We want to be the same. Okay, so just, I think you've heard a lot about EVs already this morning. You're going to hear a little bit more. Listed some benefits that we noticed, that we like to talk about when we talk about EVs and why it's important, but really we're talking about the back end, the infrastructure. We want to make sure that it's cheaper to fill up than it is to fill up with gasoline. We want to make sure that the greenhouse gas emissions are being impacted in a positive way. To that end, the chart down here on the bottom, we did a project in Parry Sound, microgrid. I don't know if anybody, you know, the trestle charger that Kara was mentioning. It allowed us to work with Georgian College, and we built a greenhouse gas information system. We can capture all the information from that charger, how often it's used, what greenhouse gas emissions it's offsetting, and we have that information available, charted and available on our website, or speedier.ca. We can do the same thing. This is not the same as your emission reductions that you do per vehicle necessarily. If you own an EV, you can figure out what greenhouse gas, you know, what your impacts are. This is by the charger. So this is letting us know more on a community basis what the impacts are for our visitors as well as our local residents. You've seen, next slide, you've seen this chart. Ben just showed this chart in his last presentation. So we are all sort of telling you the same thing, the benefits of EVs, where the trends are going. We definitely all know that we're going towards EVs, whether it's, you know, going to follow that curve or not follow that curve. We need to be ready. Our communities need to have the infrastructure in place for uptake in our communities, for our local residents, but also because we're tourism driven and we need to have that infrastructure for our visitors. We had some applications go in that allowed us to put these 40 chargers that we're talking about. We've put in some other charger applications recently, so we're hoping to build out a little farther. But during the application process, we engaged with all the municipalities, and one of the quotes that we got was, the ability to provide charging as a community amenity will also attract and retain highly valued, eco-conscious residents and visitors. The installation of EV charging stations would not only provide access for the growing electric vehicle market in Ontario, but also would encourage urban EV owners to venture out into the province's smaller urban communities, in turn promoting tourism and helping to build our local economy. I couldn't write it better myself, so I used a direct quote. We're really here to support. As a municipally owned company, we want to make sure that the infrastructure is in place for all of our necessary amenities. You've heard this, level 1, level 2, level 3. We sort of like to think of it as, level 1's kind of charging at home. Level 2 is out in the community. We are looking at installing some level 2 chargers as part of those 40 stations, because we understand that some of them are going to be in locations such as community centers, where you might be going to spend 8 hours for a hockey tournament, or even 4 hours for a hockey game. And you've got the time to plug in and get that level 2 top up that's a little bit slower. And a lot of the chargers we're putting in are the level 3 DC fast chargers in some cases for that stop and go. I just need to stop and I need to go to the bathroom, give my kids some food. We're on a road trip. I just need to top up a little bit. Our chargers are going to look a little bit more like this. You've seen one of them out in the lobby. Again, a comparison like Kara did of how the different chargers and the times they take for things. We did ours a little bit differently, and we said the time for this particular case, which was 200 kilometers of range, how long would it take on each of these different chargers? It really gives you an impact on, yes, I might only go to the gas station and take 15 minutes to top up my car and get 500 kilometers of range. But the reason we're drawing the attention is because this can go in a location where you're going to spend time at a hockey game, where you're going to spend time doing your grocery shopping, for instance. I can, fill up while I'm at the mall. I can fill up while I'm doing my other errands that have to be done anyway. So it isn't an apples to apples comparison of the person who told me, no, filling up my truck at the gas station only takes me 10 minutes. It's not the same at all. We also need to point out that we want to address that range anxiety. We want to address that. I live northern-ish Ontario, so I can't have an EV because I need to go longer distances. I'm getting ahead of myself with the map. Why don't I just bring it up and then we can talk a little bit about it. We want to help fill in those gaps. When the earlier map came up and showed, the density of chargers around Toronto and Hamilton and the core areas there, we want to have not the same density, because that's not who we are, but we want to have a really good coverage so no one has range anxiety. We want to make sure the orange images are what you're seeing we have approval for already. Those are the 40 chargers we're putting in at 13 different sites over the next 9 months. 9 months. Now we're down to 9 months. They're all going to be there in 9 months. In January, we put in applications for another 25 sites. And I'm supposed to talk ports, not chargers, so 96 more places that people can charge. We will not hear on that funding until probably the end of next month. So please send us your good thoughts, and fingers crossed that we're going to get a lot more of those locations to fill in a lot more of that, the green spots you see up there. We will be shown, as the chargers come online, we've got 3 of the 40 online right now. As they come online, they will be shown on those platforms that anyone can look at and view. We will have one app. That's one of the things we really wanted to do, was bring all of our chargers together under one point of contact. So you can download our app and you can use it anywhere across this region when we get all of those chargers up and running, fingers crossed. We get funding for them all. What we have is just the one app. It will have credit card swipe payment. You won't have to download the app, but what it will give you is access to all of those chargers very easily. The next step of this, these are all public-facing chargers because the funding that was available is all for public charging stations. There is the need to run municipal charging for fleets at some point. We know that can't happen at public-facing chargers. For all of these locations that we've chosen, all of these sites, we've worked with the municipalities. And I'm going to say the majority of them are municipalities. We have a couple of private owners that we're doing some funding requests with, but the majority of them are the municipalities. We understand municipalities. We work with municipalities regularly. We want to make sure that the chargers are in the right spots at the right levels, that the municipality is engaged, to help us make sure that the public lots are plowed properly in the winter and make sure that we're all working together to the same end. We sort of put in two different kinds of chargers. We put in the public chargers because we can get some funding for those. There's some private municipally owned chargers we're looking at. There's some funding that's just been released through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. It allows some of that. We haven't had an application go into that yet, but we're hopeful that we've got a municipality. Maybe today somebody's, oh, we're ready. We're right on the edge here of thinking about converting one of our vehicles to an electric vehicle, and we would like to talk about chargers. We really want to have that information. So installing a municipal fleet charger that has the ability to provide you with who's charging, when are they charging, what's it costing us exactly. That information is critical, as well as the GHG emissions for your targets for net zero reduction, your ICE cap targets. The rates that we're charging for our public chargers are going to be market comparable, because we want our residents to feel comfortable charging at our stations, and we want the visitors that come to know that they can bring, I have two vehicles. Do I want to road trip in my electric vehicle, or do I want to road trip in my gas-powered vehicle? Well, I can do either, because I know when I go to Muskoka, there is a network, and it's comparable to anything we've got further south or west. I talked earlier about us being a very reliable solution for charging needs. And we really have thought about this, and we're working with our provider Switch for the back end for the chargers. They've got 24/7 tier 1 support they will provide. Anything that can't be solved remotely by their phone technicians will be sent to us. Lakeland has a history of customer service. We can roll a truck out. I won't say in an hour, but we can roll a truck out same day, 100%. We want to have the uptime to know that you can count on us, you can count on our chargers, and we have an inventory of spare parts at our disposal, so it won't be, oh, we've got to order parts from overseas and wait for them to arrive. It's really important to us that our communities have what they need to succeed, and we feel this infrastructure is one of those things. Short and sweet, a lot of information in a short amount of time. I didn't put a big, ask me questions, but I'm open to answer what I can.
Thank you, Marjorie. That was wonderful. Just as we go into questions here too, I have sort of a comment just to add, but not really a question. But when we think of EV charging infrastructure, we always think of the flow of electricity going from the charger to the vehicle. But there's some really interesting pilots and technology where that flow of electricity can actually go the other way, and that's something that we're very much looking to see what happens from a policy perspective in the future. Vehicle to home, right? As I mentioned in my presentation, that EV can flow electricity from the car to power your fridge in terms of a power outage, but also vehicle to grid. To the question we heard earlier, can the infrastructure, the grid, support EVs? Well, through things like vehicle to grid, the EVs can actually support the grid. If you think about it, you've got all of these mobile battery packs that are driving around. You can flow electricity to support the grid through all of these cars that have electricity. And the way that this policy is going, you can actually earn revenue from the I don't know if it's the grid or how that works, but you earn revenue. That's still being figured out.
Yep.
Something to watch.
Yep.
So let's get to some questions. I've got one over here. I saw a question over here too.
I kind of have two questions. First, are there any regulatory hurdles that you have to overcome when you're installing the network? And secondly, is there any appetite from the private sector? Like I'm thinking restaurants, marinas, where they might want to install this infrastructure. Thanks.
Great questions. The first one, the province has just made some regulatory changes to allow it to be a faster process to install EV chargers. We haven't experienced, do not anticipate any issues because this is seen province and Canada-wide as something we need to do. So they're making those changes to help us make it go faster and smoother. Public sector, yes. Sorry, private sector, wrong word. We have had a couple of businesses interested in putting some chargers into their locations. Again, there's the concerns about panel sizes. So that's one other thing that I didn't bring up in this discussion. If you have a regular building with a regular electrical panel and you think, oh, I can't install these chargers, it won't handle it. The software that we run on these chargers allows us to install more chargers than you would normally because it can restrict how much each charger is using. So if you have a fleet of 5 vehicles and your panel only really can accept 2 chargers, we can install 5 and we can let you plug in all 5 vehicles. The software will say, okay, vehicle 1 gets a little bit now, vehicle 2 gets a little bit now, vehicle 3 gets a little bit now, and it manages the output to each of the vehicles. So it manages that for you and allows you to manage how you are managing your fleet, if that makes sense. So we do have a couple of people interested in the private sector, and we're hoping that there will be more as they see these things go in. We've contacted a lot more and differing reasons why they're not interested right now. Some of it's timing for the business. Some of it's they're investing in other things right now. They haven't seen the need for it yet. But we're not stopping those conversations. We are talking to also some condos. We're talking to some places that might have that multi-family need. The same thing where we can install more chargers and manage it according to what the needs are. I'm trying to think, talk to a marina. We've talked to, a couple of different outdoor places that might benefit from having some chargers. Again, you got to look at the seasonal nature of some of these businesses. So working through some of that stuff, but we're open to any and all conversations at this point because it's so important to get that base so that people can start to build on it.
We have some more questions over here.
Hey, Marjorie.
Hey, Jen.
In the first slide, you talked about the difference between manufacturing of EV vehicles and fuel-powered vehicles. And I would love it if I could take you up on that offer that the conversation isn't over and get you to please provide us with empirical information that we can use to say, this is the truth between a myth and a fact. The statements are great. I love the statements, but they don't fly in the marketplace without data. And while there's a little bit of data there, I really would love to hope that Lakeland Solutions could give me a solution as to how much greenhouse gas is emitted with a manufacturer of an EV vehicle manufacturing firm versus a gas-powered manufacturing firm. And then also, the ones that do or do not have a tailpipe. I just need more. And the reason why I need more is because the naysayers are so strong. And, Ben's presentation was great because he provided us with data that those newspaper reporters can't be right. And I just would love that from you.
Okay. Step 1, I'm going to defer to Kara, who's making.
Yeah, it's a really important point, and I think that information is available, by the way, and I can share some information. It's mostly academic, you know. So there's a lot of academics who've looked at like cradle to grave cost of making and driving an EV, cost of making and driving a gas car. And it's been done in a lot of different jurisdictions because, of course, the driving is different if you live in Ohio versus if you live here, because the electricity source is different. And so there's been studies like that done in the US, there have been studies like that done in Canada. And I can tell you, there isn't a place on earth where an EV doesn't come out on top. And the reason for that is EVs do emit more greenhouse gas in the manufacturing process than a gas car. That is a true fact. And so then people say, oh, you see, right? But then if you add on the driving, EVs emit so much less in the driving than the equivalent gas car that in the end, the total cradle to grave, the EV comes out much, much better. And that's because most of the emissions come from the driving, not from the making, when you compare the whole thing. So anyway, hopefully that helps, but I can share some studies that show it, hands down, EVs are better.
Excellent.
We
Thank
have
you.
one more question here, and then we have one more question online, so we'll hold it to 2 questions.
Okay, so Kara, I think that's great. It has always amazed me how major companies make decisions on infographics over a white paper.
Mhm.
And so it would be really great for this level of government and interest to be able to get access to those infographics, because the white paper, even though I've written them, nobody's reading them except maybe David is, but the rest of the the world just doesn't. So I really would love it if we could level up and get some good picture graphics.
Okay.
And then we have one question online.
Yeah, just a quick question here for you. Is the price of installing a level 3 30 kilowatt the same as a level 3 180 kilowatt?
Definitely not.
Definitely not.
Definitely not. Both of them need a transformer generally. Like when we're installing, because those are the 2 levels that we are installing. And we have priced out according to the transformers and things. I'm going to say that for the most part, it's got to do with the support that you need to have under the structure and the infrastructure for the infrastructure, we'll say. It also is going to, a 180 kilowatt needs 2 parking spots because it's got 2 wands. You can charge 2 cars at the same time. A 30 kilowatt, you can only charge 1. So the difference there, you got to allow for all of the costs associated with an extra parking spot.
Thank you.
And we do have time for one more question if there's one final question. It's a quick question, okay.
Thank you, Marjorie. That was great. Can you remind us, what is Lakeland's catchment area, and do you work with First Nations? Thanks.
So Lakeland Power has a catchment area. Lakeland Holding, a little bit less. We are owned by the municipalities of Huntsville, Bracebridge, Perry Sound, Sundridge, Magnetowan, and Berks Falls. However, we as Lakeland Solutions, and I'm going to go back to my map, are going above and beyond, outside of that area, because we really want to be that solution. We want to have the knowledge, the people to recognize that this is their local provider when they are traveling a little bit farther away. And yes, we definitely are working with First Nations. You'll notice that we've got a little blue icon up there with Shawanaga, who is putting in their own chargers. We are assisting with the application. They will run on our network, just because that way we can help to manage and provide the data they need. We understand that municipalities may not have the resources to become EV charger providers, and that's what we want to be here to help support. So, any and all municipalities or private sector, or, if you just want a charger in your home, we'd love to chat about it as well, because we haven't firmed up that route yet, but it's something we're looking at because it's such an important infrastructure piece.
Well, thank you, Marjorie, and thank you for all of the work that Lakeland is doing in our local area to expand charging infrastructure. So we just have a small gift for you before you go.
Very much.
And thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
All right. Next in our agenda, we have from Enterprise Fleet Management, we have Anthony Adams, who will be giving us a conversation on fleet conversions and the work that they do. So Anthony, thanks for joining us today, and I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. As Ben said, I am from Enterprise Fleet Management, currently working with the town of Parry Sound. So thank you to Mike Kearns for letting Ben know about me and kind of getting the ball rolling on that. We're really going to talk today about kind of holistically looking at your fleet and transitioning to EV from a management perspective, more so from a public perspective. So a little bit about Enterprise Fleet Management. We are the sister company to Enterprise Rent-A-Car, who I'm sure you guys are very familiar with. One of the largest private fleet ownership in the world, over 2.1 million vehicles and over 10,000 locations globally. In terms of fleet management, we're also the largest fleet management provider, over 600,000 vehicles managed through us across North America. And then just a bit of an industry update for you guys, just on where EVs are. We currently have over 500,000 zero-emission vehicles within Canada, largely within 3 provinces, being BC, Quebec, Ontario. Makes a ton of sense. It's our 3 largest urban centers between Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. As you've seen through previous slides, largest charging network there makes it really enticing for individuals to go to EV. We've got auto manufacturers increasing incentives continuously, in partnership with federal and provincial governments as well. So think of your IZEV rebates up to 10 vehicles per year. Thanks to the government, it's really been enticing for individuals to look at the increased cost of EVs from a purchasing standpoint compared to ICE engines. We've also seen costs from a production standpoint decrease over the last 12 months, where Ford's actually decreased the cost of the F-150 Lightning, making it very comparable to their ICE engine options there as well, where it's almost equivalent from a cost perspective of purchasing. Each year, we're looking at about 40 to 50 new models coming into the market over the next 3 years. So we'll be seeing about 150 new EV models by 2026, which is really enticing. Obviously, there will be some new technology that comes out as well, increased range and different adaptations there. So really exciting to see what comes out from that perspective. And just to kind of go over that just a bit more, what's really driving the adoption? Government regulations, obviously mandating by 2030. Most new vehicles need to be from an electric standpoint. We also have driver experience, individuals who are driving EVs, swear by them, really helping push individuals who are still in their ICE vehicles to converting. And we've got the financial value, the cost of operations. We've got lower maintenance costs on EVs compared to ICE engines. Great warranties on batteries going 8 to 10 years, which compared to your ICE warranty is almost twice as long. But it really comes down to how do you move to an EV? It's great to want to get there, but what is your plan? So what we've done is we've partnered with telematics providers, predominantly Geotab. What we'll do is run an EV suitability assessment on a fleet. So we'll get a Geotab device, put into an OBD2 port. We'll run about 6 months worth of data from the vehicle to determine if that vehicle is actually suited to transition to an EV based off of what's available in the market. From there, how are you going to implement it, right? Where's your charger going to go? Is it going to go to your employee? Is it going to be on site? You know, who's covering the cost of installing the charger if it goes to the employee? How are you reimbursing them for the cost of the electricity they're using to charge the vehicle? A lot of HR questions. So what we actually did on our own fleet of vehicles is we ran a fleet suitability assessment with Geotab, and we found that about 12% of our vehicles could currently transition over to EVs. Of that, we had over over 90,000 vehicles. So about 9,000 currently can go to EV compared to the other 80,000 that need to stay in an ICE engine currently. From there, 42,000 vehicles with new EV pickup trucks, mainly the Silverado EV that's coming to market this year, can look at transitioning over to EV, but there's still a long way to go to get every vehicle over to the new EV standards. And then, of course, Marjorie just kind of touched on the different chargers, but which charger suits the need. Again, if a vehicle is going to be given to, say, a supervisor, and the supervisor is going to be charging the vehicle at home, are you providing them a level 1, a level 2 charger? Are they sourcing the charger themselves? Reimbursement, things of that nature. If you're going to be, utilizing for public works or parks and rec, are you going with a level 3 charger in your own yard? Are you going with a couple level 2s? We actually have one GTA-based municipality who only have residential-facing chargers. They've actually ran into issues where they're not able to charge their vehicles when they want to. Everything's being used by the public. So finding a delicate balance where you have your public-facing chargers, but you also have chargers for when you need them. Of course, infrastructure is getting better, as Marjorie kind of went through, which is fantastic. We do find that by 2030, we should have a really sustainable network. Tesla's been working on it for years. Back when I was in our rental division, they were actually renting ICE vehicles to go into northern Quebec and actually install their charging network. So we are getting there, slowly but surely. And it's been great that a lot of manufacturers are actually moving to a universal charging point. So Ford, Mercedes, GM, and a few others are moving over to the Tesla charging, which is great. A few others are following next year, I believe Nissan. And they have, I'm losing my words. They have a conversion kit for older vehicles to move over to that platform now as well. And of course, cold weather impact is always important, especially for a region such as this. We typically see about a 20 to 30% range reduction in cold weather. The nice thing is with technology increasing and those ranges increasing, your range anxiety is going to decrease, right? If you have a 600 kilometer range, getting 400 in the winter is still serviceable, especially in a municipal setting. Whereas the current 400 kilometer range, if that's going down to 200, it may not be feasible for the application. And then the last important point on EVs is really trying to forecast where the used market is going, right? So where's the retention on the vehicle values? It's been increasing significantly as the public sector's appetite for EVs have been increasing. It's going up, and at this point, it's almost intersecting with ICE engines, which is great, but we need to see it almost surpass it. From a total cost of ownership perspective, once the residuals on older EVs are higher, you'll actually see that these win out on a side-by-side comparison. And I really flew through that, but I do have a couple links there as well for how we electrified our fleet, as well as some data points that Ben can share for what we've done with Geotab. Yeah.
Thank you, Anthony. I have one quick tip and trick for everyone, and then I'll actually have a question for you myself. Sure. You had a great slide on there that showed the range loss in cold weather, and that's totally a true thing. Quick tip and trick for everybody: if you leave your vehicle in while it's, before you go, while it's warming up, you don't experience as much of that range loss. That does happen. So, from a municipal fleet dispatch perspective, it's pretty common for people to start the car before you get in and go out and to do work in the day. If you leave that vehicle plugged in, that range loss is going to be greatly reduced. So just a quick tip and trick on that. And my question is, could you give us a little bit of an overview, because you've been working with Mike Kearns at the town of Parry Sound, and he mentioned at our last IceCat meeting that they actually just purchased a Ford F-150 and they've got a Lakeland Charger going in to service that vehicle. So it's a nice sort of connection point with us. Can you tell us a little bit about what that process looked with like Parry Sound and how that fleet assessment came about and why that vehicle was decided on 100%. Electrifying it?
Yeah, so we were looking at a Parks and Rec vehicle, and it really just came down to the application of the vehicle. How much driving are you really doing in a day? How much payload's going in the back of the vehicle? Are you towing with the vehicle? Is there a charging point for it? Who's driving the vehicle? And in that conversation with Mike, it really came out that the vehicle's going to a few parks a day. We're doing maybe 40, 50 kilometers. We're not leaving the vehicle idling when we're stopping, which is important as well. And we're really towing a couple lawnmowers, putting some leaves in the back, so payload's not really an issue. So with all of that kind of going through, we realized, your payload's staying really low. It's not going to affect your range. We're not towing. It's not going to affect your range as well. We had, a 360 kilometer range on the base F-150 Lightning. Based off their application, it was a suitable vehicle to replace an ICE engine. This was after Ford had actually decreased the cost of an F-150 Lightning as well by about $15,000. So from a side-by-side comparison, it came out to an equal cost from an acquisition standpoint, lower costs on maintenance, lower costs on fuel. So it came out as a winner on a side-by-side comparison.
And I'm going to follow up with a follow-up question, but if there's any questions out in the audience as well, if you could please raise your hand and I'll get to those as well too. You mentioned from a Parks and Rec perspective, same process follows for a Public Works perspective as well too, in terms of looking at operational needs and suitability?
Yeah, so same process would follow. Mike and Vinny have actually just signed on for Geotab as well, so we're putting telematics into the fleet at Perry Sound. So for Public Works, we find that there's substantially more idling, especially on road crews, things of that nature. An hour of idling is equivalent to about 30, 40 kilometers of use. So being able to see how much they're actually losing just from having the vehicles kind of idle while they're working will let us know if the current market will allow us to go to EVs. It also really helps that the new Silverado EV coming out has close to a 600 kilometer range, so that can increase our chances as well.
Something else that just came to my mind before, I'm going to steal the mic again. From a Public Works perspective, the nice thing sometimes about these vehicles is that you can actually run and charge your power tools off of these vehicles compared to the gas version, right? So
you can do that on an ICE engine vehicle as well. Many of them do have outlets in the bed, but obviously there's emissions to that, right? You're going to have an ICE engine running. It's going to be idling with fumes going the entire time. So maybe from a health and safety standpoint, that may not be the best option. So in that respect, of course.
And I guess then my question is, does that charging, have a huge impact on the actual range? If I was to say in a Parks and Rec scenario to charge the battery pack on my weed whacker, for example, is that going to have a huge impact on the range?
Something small like that wouldn't have a significant impact on the range. You might look at losing 10, 15 kilometers, but if you're staying within municipal boundaries, charging the vehicle when necessary, I don't see range anxiety coming in as a factor.
Awesome, thanks. So sorry everyone for stealing all of the questions, but are there any questions in the audience? Are there any questions online? Oh, we have one.
Cool.
Thanks, Ben. And thank you for the presentation. You likely know more about the auto industry and some of the associated timelines than many of us in the room. You talked about the Silverado EV coming, and something that we've seen is like the availability to purchase an EV off of the dealership lot is a challenge. Is there trends in the market that you see that improving?
It's improving slowly. What you'll notice with dealer options is they're going to have the higher trim vehicles sitting on their lot. So for example, for an F-150 Lightning, you can go and find them on a dealer's lot. You'll find the Platinums and the King Ranches and $100,000 versions. Typically what we want to focus on is based off the application. You don't necessarily need that type of trim level. So being proactive and looking at placing orders with the manufacturer and the OEM to get the lower trim levels will come out a bit better. Right now, EVs, depending on what you're looking for, can range anywhere from 6 to 12 months. F-150 Lightnings right now are closer to the 6-month mark. Their production's ramped really well. From an SUV and sedan perspective, it's taking a bit longer just because there is more of a retail and individual demand for those vehicles.
We have a question over here as well.
Just a quick question about so the federal regulations are obviously pushing EVs very heavily, and there's that target set for 100% EVs. Is that something that Enterprise is seeing with their fleet, with your fleet? Are you hitting targets, at that level?
I won't speak for the rental division because it's a little bit different. Obviously, it's harder on a rental side to ensure that you have an EV fleet if the individuals renting the vehicle don't have a place to charge. And it becomes an issue with rentals going to superchargers with data information. So I know they are working on that, but from a fleet perspective, it is something that we're working on with our clients to meet those regulations. We've done EVs, obviously, with the town of Parry Sound. We're doing an assessment with the town of Penetanguishene. We've done an entire assessment with the city of Kingston, where we're fully moving their fleet over to EV as well. So if the vehicles make sense and if the data suggests that they're the best option, that's what we recommend.
Are there any final questions? Well, thank you very much for your time today, Anthony. We really appreciate it. We got you a small little gift as well.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Cool. Yeah, no worries.
Next on our agenda for today, we have Mike Wakeham joining us from the Strathroy Caradoc Fire Department. I first came across Mike's presentation actually through, I believe it was EV Society of Canada, looking at sort of the emergency response to these types of vehicles. You know, as we saw from some of that data before, we're seeing more and more of these vehicles hit our road, and the trend suggests that we're going to see more and more hit our roads as well too. So there's, you know, a real need from a community perspective and an emergency response perspective to, you know, be fully aware and knowledgeable on how to respond to these types of emergencies, because there's going to be more, unfortunately, that do happen, right? So thank you, Mike, for joining us and driving all this way today. So I'll pass things over to you.
Perfect, up there. Very good. Okay, great. Thank you very much for having me as a part of this today. The fire industry is getting hit kind of a little differently when it comes to electric vehicles. A lot of things that I've heard from it is the danger side of it. Am I going to get electrified if I spray water on a car that's electric car that's on fire? All kinds of tests. No, that's not going to happen. So I'm just going to back up a little bit here, give you a little bit of the background of why I got into this, especially with the electric vehicle side. So 20 some odd years as a technician for General Motors. So I specialized in diesel trucks, electronics, which then got me into the electrical side of it. So anything EV, plug-in hybrids, all that kind of stuff was what I did. So I became a volunteer firefighter, a little town outside of Strathroy. I was there for 5 years. Got into the extrication side of it. I kind of like the rescue side of it, cutting up cars, saving people that way. So nobody had really done anything in regards to the electric side of it. So I thought, I'm going to take my knowledge from that, bring it into this, which is what I've done. And now with Strathroy Caradoc, I've been there, well, I think almost 14 years. So I teach all kinds of different departments, stuff on electric vehicle extrication, regular extrication. It's been a passion for me, and I absolutely love it. So when we get into the side of the electric vehicle side, I'm actually going to bring in things like e-bikes. Okay, e-bikes are gaining huge popularity all over the place. Last time I was in Windsor, they have them all through Windsor, and I think you use your phone, you connect to it, you go for a ride, and you dump it, and you leave it there. Next person gets on it, away they go. They can drive around. I think at night they pick them up, they charge them, and they bring them back. So that was something new for me. I didn't think I would see that ever here, but it's neat, and they get used. Lots of people use them. Okay, so that was good. When we go, let's see if I can do this right here. Perfect. When we look at an electric vehicle bike and a car itself, lithium-ion batteries in them, lithium batteries, whatever. So what happens with these things, especially in the automotive side of it, is we have to, for a lithium-ion battery to work properly, it has to stay within a certain temperature range. So with cars, they use cooling systems and heating systems to maintain that battery temperature on those vehicles for when it's super hot out, when it's cold, when it's under load, they produce heat as we're using the electricity. With cars, they've put in, and I do have, I'm going to skip. I'm going to get right into this here. I'm going to jump around a little bit just because some of this stuff was covered by some of the other people here, which was great. So with the lithium-ion battery, when these batteries overheat, this is when they get into the thermal runaway. Okay, so this is a reaction inside that just creates more and more heat. The way it goes, it spreads, catches on fire, and then burns for a very long time. Okay, this isn't like a normal car fire where it will go for maybe half an hour, or something like that in a time frame for us. So a car starts on fire, we get a call, go put a car fire out, we might be there an hour, we're gone. Electric vehicle, when we get into the battery side of it, depending on what is going on with it, we could be there for hours. Okay, so this has now put a strain on the fire departments because now our small little calls we have for a nuisance car fire has now stretched out, could stretch out further. Okay, a couple different things we can look at when we go to put those out, which I will get into in a moment here. When we get into this car fire side of it, just the statistic or kind of the stuff that they've done some research on. This was from 2022. Okay, so this is the car fires in an EV versus internal combustion engine, so an ICE. Okay, so from last year, this was in the US, this was a 22 study. What they saw was 25 fires per 100,000 electric vehicles sold. Compare that to a gas, diesel, whatever, 1,530 fires for every 100,000 car that was available or that was sold. So you kind of got to take that with a grain of salt, because when you get into the gas side of it, there's all kinds of things that take into account for that. More so arson, theft, just other goofy things that people do to light cars on fire. When you get into the EV side of it, you don't seem to fall into the theft side of it, where people steal cars when they're done with it, they light them on fire. The crash side of it, yes, we do get some more stuff, especially if the battery is damaged itself. There was one which I couldn't get out. I was going to try and get a whole bunch of stuff in, but I'm shortened on time here. I could talk about this for hours. So I'm trying to bring it down in. There was one case that I'd seen. It was a Tesla, hit something on the highway, punctured the battery, went into thermal runaway. Okay, that makes sense. Gas vehicle, absolutely. You can run over something, you can puncture something in the back. If it's a hot exhaust, hot summer day, you can catch fire. So there's really nothing more or less with the two cars that say, okay, one's worse than the other one. It's just when it happens in an EV, it can happen for a long time, okay? For us to extinguish fires in an EV, one option, the one that they kind of strongly push against or point towards now, is water. Okay, that's about the only thing that we can do with an electric vehicle is to put water in it. Okay, so it's copious amounts of water. Go to a normal car fire or gas car fire now, whatever water you have on your #1 engine, you're going to use that. You may get into a tanker nursing water off of another truck if you're out in a rural area. If you're in where you can catch to a hydrant, you may go through a tank and a half on a truck. If you get into an electric vehicle, you can go 30, 60,000 gallons of water to get the fire out in an EV vehicle. Okay, so what you're potentially doing with this is you're reducing the temperature of that battery to get it out of that thermal runaway state and just neutralize it. So which is pretty much going to be ambient temperature. So with that said, you can't get inside a battery. Okay, they're all surrounded in with a big steel protective case on them. We can't go in with our cutting tools or jaws, whatever, cut it open and put the hose in there and away we go. Okay, that makes the situation worse because now we're damaging the cells inside. So it's just spraying water on the outer case, checking it with our thermal imaging cameras, getting that battery to reduce its temperature down to stop that thermal runaway. The other option we have, which I've done quite a bit of research on this, seen a lot of things from around the world, is fire blankets. I'm gonna jump to here, okay? So that's exactly what it is, a big blanket you throw over top of the car. By doing that, right, we're smothering it out. So I've done a little research around here, and what I have come up with, there's a couple companies in our areas that do sell this. The first one is AJ Stone. Okay, so AJ Stone and Rescue Tech all carry these blankets. The one that I had got through AJ Stone's called the Fire Isolator Blanket, which is this one here. 9 meters by 6 meters in size. So when you drape this over top of the car, this is what you get. Okay, so it's completely covered. There is that YouTube video there on the bottom that it's in a very short amount of time, it has dropped the temperature of that car so drastically that I was very surprised. Way faster than water would have done it. They pulled the blanket off. Some of the areas that were still on fire with the actual car side of it, they could hit with water. And they knocked it down. It saved them a huge amount of water, which is huge. Some of these remote areas, it's very difficult to get water. You have to buy $500,000 trucks just to carry water to a fire to help put it out. Okay. The other option they have, price on this one here. This was multi-use, so I think 7 to 8 uses out of it, depending on the situation that it's in. They're about $3,300, $3,400. So this, nice thing with this, it's not just for cars. Okay, you can use it for everything too. If you get somewhere, there's a garbage bin that somebody's lit on fire, you could throw it over top of that, boom, and put it out super fast. All kinds of options for it. This, now I have not seen this actually in person, using a blanket on an electric car. Just with these videos though, on the test they did, it was real life. I was very impressed with it, okay? The other one too that they have them for, smaller size, is the e-bikes. Okay, lots of people have, I'm sure there's people around here that have them, especially in the summertime, they'll use them to ride around. E-bikes do. The biggest thing I think with a lot of e-bikes, tools, toys, are the batteries and the chargers for them that cause these fires. So it's just like your phone, if you buy, I'm gonna say iPhone, you wanna buy a charger for it, they're expensive. So what do? You go on Amazon, go to the corner store, it's some aftermarket company has these things for a fraction of the price. So you buy that, you buy the little charge port that plugs into the wall, and usually that does not work properly with your phone, with your e-bike, and it has a different voltage. Okay, and this is what happens. This overheats the batteries because it's not monitoring it, which puts these things in fires. So in New York, actually, I'll start with Toronto. So in Toronto 2022, they had 29 battery fires. And then in 23, they had 51 battery fires. So these were e-bikes, laptops, cell phones, and toys. I believe we've encountered 2 in Strathroy-Caradoc. So one was an e-bike and the other one was a golf cart. And I believe both of them were plugged in being charged. Okay, so for me, any recommendations to somebody that has one of those, I would not put it in my house. Garage, maybe, if you have a shed, you can do that with electricity in it that way, plug it in there. They always say don't leave them plugged in forever. Once they're charged, unplug them. The biggest thing is these chargers. A lot of people buy aftermarket batteries because the ones that are for the actual manufacturer, very expensive. Okay, I know that. I had a Dyson vacuum. I did the same thing. I bought one cheaper off Amazon. Luckily, I had nothing go wrong, but some of you may have seen, they just had a recall on a battery that was purchased through Amazon for a Dyson vacuum. I think it's the same one I bought, so. Issue with that too, especially with Amazon, that's been looked into. They've talked to Amazon about it. They don't go through everything they sell on Amazon, right? They don't inspect it, make sure everything is good. If you look at a charger, anything plugs into the wall, somewhere on it, there'll be a sticker, a UL sticker on it. You wanna make sure, or it's cast into the actual casing of it, make sure it's legit. People will make stickers up, put it on and go, yeah, it's fine, here you go. That is a huge thing. You want this stuff to be certified and proper for the device that you're charging. Stick to the manufacturer, especially with e-bikes when we get into the batteries on those. Don't modify them. I know it's like a car, we like to modify it, make it go faster, more powerful, all that kind of stuff. That does happen with the e-bikes. And a lot of that stuff is what's getting us into these electric fires, okay? Things are just, they're not looked after properly. They're not kept well. E-bikes don't have anything to heat and cool necessarily that I know of for the batteries, so they have no way of doing any thermal management on them. If I get back to the vehicles, I'm going to go to this here. So this has been pushed in the fire industry right from the get-go. So this is a firefighter's answer to everything. Cut the cut loop. I'm going to say myself, I would never cut it. And I was backed up. I never felt comfortable about it. I was backed up by this with GM last summer. So they did an EV, emergency response EV course at Durham College. So I attended that. Their reasoning behind it makes sense to me. If you get to an EV fire, what's the fire from? Could be inside. Somebody may have done something inside, lit the interior on fire. That's fine. You put it out, check the battery. If it's within temperature, you're good. If it starts as an electric battery fire, the issue that has happened is that battery was not managed properly. So because these vehicles are equipped with the thermal management system, which heat and cool that battery, when you cut that 12 volts, most manufacturers, that shuts that down. So if that car's been in an accident and you need to extricate somebody out of that, or two people or a family out of it, shut the car off, take the remote if you can, if it's depending, or their card, or whatever it is. If you can take that out of the car away from there, that is better than cutting the loop, right? That'll allow that cooling system to still try and manage that battery just in case it was damaged. So if here, there's a lot of rock, right? So if a car smashed into the rocks, slid off the road, hit one of the rocks or something like that, that still can try to manage the cooling system in it. If the airbags go off, it will shut the high voltage system down. Most, I believe, still leave the 12 volts running, which is what these cooling systems run off of. Okay, so Chevy Bolt, I do also teach for General Motors technicians that work on these cars, so I train them on how to fix the cars, how the technology works. Chevy Bolt has 3 thermal management systems in it. One for the cabin for us, one for the electronics for the battery, and then one for the battery. Okay, you open the hood on one of those, there's 3 coolant jugs in it, or 3 coolant reservoirs in it, okay? They divide them up because they all need to be looked after differently. Number 1 priority is the battery. So they will sacrifice cabin comfort to manage that battery, okay? And that's what we want, right? We want to try and keep that within the proper operating range. So for me, I honestly don't know when I would cut that cut loop. I'd want to leave it going for as much as I can. Just because if something did happen because it wasn't managing that battery properly and we had an issue getting somebody out, you could make things different that way. So biggest thing is just trying to shut it off. But they do have, and they do sell them here, these emergency plugs. So these are great for us as firefighters. Police can use them too, right? I could see this in the near future. They start pulling people over, pop your charge door, plug this in. What this does is it tricks the vehicle to think that it is charging, and it will not allow you to put it into drive. Okay, so one of the things for us as a firefighter, for rescue calls, first thing we want to do is disable the vehicle, isolate the vehicle, crib it, chalk it, stop it from going anywhere. They do move. Car can be completely smashed up on its wheels, it still can move. Electric vehicle, can we hear it? No. We don't know if it's in drive. We have no idea. So we do need to isolate that vehicle and try and get it to not roll away. So this is the perfect thing. Still keeps the 12 volts going. As some of you know, if you do have electric cars and it's plugged in, you jump in it, you go to hit start, it will start up or go into its propulsion mode, but it will not allow you to put it into drive to drive away because that plug is in it. Okay, so that's exactly what this does. They do have different sizes, different makes, different models. Making the standardization of the plugs going to help, obviously. That'll make things easier for a lot of people. What else have I got here? So when we get into this type of stuff for us, oh, I know what I forgot to touch on, chargers. So we get into the level 2, level 3 chargers. People like to park their cars, some in their garage. They have their chargers in the garage. Level 2, I don't know if it'd even be possible to get a level 3 at a residential. I don't think their hydro system at a house is possible for that. So they're generally going to be level 2. If we do get to a fire in a garage, if they do park it in there, as a firefighter, you're going to want to unplug it, obviously. Depending on the state of what the fire is with the vehicle, most of them, if not all of them now, have thermal management sensors in the batteries, which will sound the horn on the cars and flash the lights until the 12-volt system's dead. Okay, so there's usually enough warning for people, especially if you are at home. You'll hear it go off at 2 in the morning. You think somebody's stealing your car. Car could be going into a thermal runaway. Okay, so they do monitor you that way. So we don't want the house to burn down, obviously. There probably will be longer time before we do get into a situation where that car will burn the house down with the way that they manage and monitor that system now. For us, a controlled pull the car out, right? The last thing you want to do is in somebody's tight garage that's got boxes and stuff all around, and we have to go in and try and fight an electric vehicle fire when it's into the battery. A controlled drag the car out of the garage, out into the laneway, allow us to work safer with it, get to it and figure it out what it is. Some cases may be, if the battery is on fire, to let it burn. Okay, there's lots of stuff you'll see online that it's 5, 6, 7 hours to put a battery fire out, bring the temperature down with water, let it burn, hour and a half, 2 hours. Okay, certain circumstances will justify letting it burn, okay, depending on where it is. Also with this, what we have to watch now is the tow guys when they come to take them afterwards. They can reignite if they're not taken care of correctly, and temperatures are down to where they should be before they take them away. I think that's come around a fair bit. A lot of people have learned from that. Lots of cases of that in the US where the cars reignite back on the tow trucks. Flatbed choice for EVs, best choice for them. A lot of them all-wheel drive, some are front-wheel drive, some are rear-wheel drive. So flatbeds are the best ones to pull them on. A lot of some of the districts I've talked to, different fire departments I talked to, they have SOGs that one of their pumper trucks follows the tow guys back to their yard until the car's dropped off, and then they keep it secured 50 feet, 50 meters, whatever they choose to, away from anything else. Okay. One thing I'm going to touch on too is electric fire trucks. So this is sort of kind of new. As was mentioned, we do have one in Ontario here. These are fully electric, but they do have a 3-liter, I think it's a 6-cylinder diesel engine on them. So that fire truck will not run out of electricity in the middle of a fire and let the house burn down. Okay, lots of complaints, lots of people speculate stuff on these things and go, well, it's not going to last forever. If it's an 8-hour fire, the truck's going to run out and the house is going to burn down. So that's a dumb idea to do that. They do have backup. It's a hybrid. Okay, put it that way. It's a hybrid electric fire truck, which will keep the pump going, keep electricity going, to keep that truck going. From my side of it, GM side of it, we're going to see a lot more plug-in hybrids come out. Straight electric, yep, they're always going to be here, but there's going to be more hybrids, especially the plug-in. So a lot of hybrid stuff with the normal gas diesel engines. There are some that are propane natural gas, and you're going to see a jump in hydrogen. So I know GM and Honda, I believe, have teamed up. They do have a couple hydrogen systems out for vehicles. Toyota, I believe, just announced one that's a hybrid that is hydrogen and electric. So when you look at that, you've got hydrogen tank, very explosive, and you have a battery in a car. So that could change things also for us too. My biggest thing with them, don't be afraid of them. They're not going to kill you. Even with us on the fire side of it, they do have systems, obviously they disable them where they run orange wiring for us. Orange wire is all high voltage. We're not going to have to cut through any of those, but anything that's in a situation like that, unless the car is in drive, it's not going to have electrical current through those. Okay, there's tons and tons of safety devices on these new vehicles. So they're safe as far as I'm concerned. I would not be afraid to work on an electric vehicle as a firefighter for anything. Okay, just simple steps, same thing we would do with the normal gas powered. Shut them down, make sure that the key is off, and you're good to go. So I think that has got most of my stuff. Oh, also on the fire side, apps. I forgot about this. So emergency response guides. There's one there for the new E-Ray, the Corvette. Okay, this gives us huge amounts of information in regards to where the batteries are, where the airbags are, the different strength of steel in them when we get to the different pictures on them, where the 12-volt system is, and they also show us where the cut loop is. I believe there's the new Blazer. Okay, and that's showing us some of the structure side of it, right? So the protective cage on these cars. The other thing too, I got to mention about this, and this, I just seen an article on it too a little while ago. Obviously with an electric vehicle, we have a large battery pack, a lot of weight. These vehicles are much heavier than what they used to be. This one I had was on something to do with the center medians, I think, that they used to stop the cars from crossing over. More damage to those now because these heavyweight electric vehicles are hitting these things harder and causing more damage that way. I thought that was kind of interesting because they don't weigh any more than a transport does that hits those. So, you know, there's always negativity in everything, right? Doesn't matter what it is. There's people against everything. Hydrogen, right? There's lots of comments on that now that it's not worth it. It costs more to produce it, and we get the same thing with electric vehicles, right? As was mentioned before, they cause more harm making the batteries than you get out of them. Well, we can prove it differently. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap it up there with that. I can keep going on and on with more stuff with the fire side of it. But for us, safety is a big thing. Okay, the fires in electric vehicle do have very powerful toxins that come out of them. One thing I was going to mention in regards to that, placement of chargers. So this is another one, I get asked this question all the time. Underground parking spots, above ground parking spots, where's the best place to put chargers? Don't put them in the middle of the parking. Okay, so if it's an underground parking lot, don't put EV chargers right in the dead center. There's a lot of apartment buildings that will not install them. They refuse to because they're afraid they're going to catch on fire and they don't want them in their buildings. If they're kept close to the exit, close to the entrance, easier for us for fire suppression on them if something does happen. Just the biggest thing with them is because the length of time it can take to put them out, if it's closer to there, it's easier for us. Some of these apartment places that refuse to put them in have decided to do that, and they'll keep them very close to an exit. So it's easily accessible for us to get to, and they don't have to worry about taking the whole complex down, which over or above underground parking is all cement, and I don't think that's going to burn down, but it's all this stuff that people are thinking about, these of why they're bad, why they're good. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it there. I think I've touched kind of on what I wanted to touch with, but yeah, any questions related to the fire side, I'd be more than happy to help.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. That was awesome. I think that's a perspective I know myself and probably a few of us out here really haven't seen on that side of EVs before. So really appreciate bringing that. I've got a question, and then we're going to actually go back to a question that we had earlier before, because you might have the answer on that too. So if audience and online you have questions as well, raise your hand and put that in the chat. My question is, do you offer hands-on training in terms of electric vehicles to fire departments?
Absolutely. If you can get an electric vehicle for me to cut up, I'd be more than happy to come.
I'd love to be able to.
That's the biggest restriction for us. It's very difficult because there is not many out there. We can't just go to the auto wreckers and get them. I can get tons of hybrids, which will work. The technique is pretty much the same, but I've done several EV seminars with departments where I reach out to the Ontario EV Club, the Canadian EV Club, and say, look, I'm doing this. Can people bring their cars for us to show? And it is awesome. The amount of people that come that say, yes, I'm going to come. You end up with about 50 Teslas, but you do get some of the other ones, which is kind of nice. And you always learn. The BMWs at the E3 or 3E or something like that, I think that little one, carbon fiber. I had no idea. So it's a carbon fiber car. So for us, our extrication cutting tools and spreading are useless, right? It'll probably cause more harm than it will do any good. So something like that, we're going to a Sawzall. So a lithium battery operated Sawzall. And we'll cut the car apart with that, which works very effectively. I do lots of training with that. But the EV side of it, the technique's pretty much the same. But I do go over shutting the car down, cribbing the car, how you can go about stabilizing it, if it's on its side, on its back, or whatever. But the hardest thing is that we can't get the car to physically, say, flip one on its side and show you what to do. But absolutely, I do training for sure.
That's great. It sounds like a grant that I need to work on, find an EV for you to set on fire. We have another question online. This one was earlier about the wheels locking up. So I'll just let Ethan reread that question for you.
Two questions, actually. So the first one here, emergency services have told me EVs are a problem if they fail or run out of batteries as the wheels lock up, and so therefore they cannot be pushed. Is that true?
Yeah, I understand what they're saying, but I don't know why we'd want to push it. If a vehicle is an EV vehicle is in a car accident as a fire, you're not saving anything. And I had a Tesla accident where somebody hit the front of them, damaged the wheel, and I think the headlight or something like that, and they wrote the car off. So I think the concern was that because there was an impact, it may have got something into the battery side of it. So if we have to push a car, move a car, we'll get a tow company, we'll get one of our trucks, and we'll drag it. Okay. Right? So we're not there to save your precious car. We're there to save your life if there's something that way, right? If somebody's injured, that's what we're into. So it's not going to destroy the car if we have to pull it, move it 10 feet, whatever. And if it's been in an accident, they're probably going to write it off anyways. So whether that answers that, I don't know.
I wanted to add on not on the fire side, but I think if the person's asking, like, can it be towed, basically, because the wheels have locked, or let's say just run out, not an accident, you just run out of charge, or you have, like I got a flat, for example, and, so I did have to be towed. And basically, it's not really true. There is a neutral setting for all the EVs so that they can be towed, and most of the tow truck drivers know how to do it. Like I know, for example, on Tesla, like there's a way to set it into tow mode, which like is basically neutral, right? And so that exists for most of the cars, and the tow truck drivers, for the most part, no. But in the early days, like I had a 2011 Nissan Leaf and I got a flat, and they flat bedded it because they were like afraid to tow it. But I think that is no longer a big issue.
But you obviously had electrical power to put that in neutral. Yeah, so if you don't have electric, right. And so if you don't have electric power, they'll flatbed it, they'll put it on dollies. And it happens a lot. Dealerships put their vehicles out on display. If they don't touch them for 2-3 weeks, they're not plugged in, they're right dead, right? So they have to get them in or do whatever. It's a part of it. There's always a way without damage.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Two more questions here. What are some of the secondary benefits of an EV fire truck? We've heard from someone who works in Toronto that they are whisper quiet.
Okay, so for me, and I know this from experience, when I'm at a fire, we have SCBA, we have air masks on, whatever, to protect ourselves from it that way. These trucks, when they're diesel trucks, have exhaust pipes that stick out the sides. They always seem to put them in the wrong possible spot. And if it's anywhere near your working, you're breathing in the fumes from that. I've witnessed it, I've seen it, I've heard lots of people complain about it. One advantage to that, I guess, is you're not going to have that anymore. I don't know. I guess the biggest advantage is going to be the fumes and the fuel used from that large diesel engine to idle that truck and run the pump. The electric ones, obviously, it runs off electricity, but it still does have a small, and I think it's a Cat 3-liter diesel generator, so to speak, right? So that just runs like a generator to keep electricity going through the rest of it so that the truck works, right? So you need something to run the PTO for the pump, right? To pump water. That's what the diesel engine would do. You'd flip it over, the electric engine would run the PTO to run the pump. And an electric fire truck, it's a motor on the axle. So they can't, I suppose there's a way they could do it, but it's easier just to flip it around that way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Second question here. We're hearing that the lithium iron phosphate batteries don't have the same thermal runaway problem. Any experience fighting a battery fire in a LiFePO 4 battery in a new 2021 Tesla Y or other?
Okay, what was the last part of that?
Do you have any experience fighting a battery fire in a
in a Tesla.
I suppose it's a new LiFePO 4 battery
Yes.
in a new 2021 Tesla Y or newer.
Yeah, I have never had a Tesla on fire to fight the fire on it. A fire is a fire. The only thing that I know of when we start comparing different batteries together is the e-bikes. They have all different kinds for them. Those ones, and if you go online, you'll see the videos, especially New York. New York's getting slammed with these things. There's lots of videos. You see the smoke on them. They got the ring camera things inside, and boom, they blow up. Right? So and I don't know the cause. I've never looked in it to see if they've determined what the cause was of why these things were catching fire, but I'm assuming it's plugged in, it's charging, it's not the right charger for it, or different battery, or somebody's modified it. I don't know. Just for something to just start on fire, the percentage of that, I believe, is very, very low. Something would have had to cause it. And when you start seeing that many in e-bikes and toys and cell phones, you know it's not the manufacturer, it's how it's being charged and how it's being stored.
Are there any final questions that we have? Any online? Okay, seeing none. Thanks, Mike.
Perfect.
We really appreciate having you out here
You're
today.
very welcome. Thank you.
And just have a small gift for you as well, too.
Great.
But yeah, really appreciate sharing your knowledge. And yes, thanks.
Thank you.
Just a reminder to everybody too, now we're going into the lunch period. So this is your reminder that you all have a survey on your desk. And if you would like lunch, that is your ticket for lunch. We will be asking you for your ticket in order to get lunch. Thank you, everybody. And thank you as well, too, for joining us today. It's great to see a great turnout here, as well as a great online turnout. Thank you, those who joined us online. And we'll be following up with a very similar survey. So thank you, everybody online as well. What's that? We're done. That's it? Yep.